Hi everybody, generic Irish PlayStation man here, and if you can believe it, it's a long video once again. Last time we looked at the incredible collection of games Capcom brought to the original PlayStation, featuring plenty of 2D heavy hitters, 3D versions of 2D heavy hitters, some classic role-playing games, and a whole bunch of survival horror classics, and also Resident Evil Survivor, that was there too. Now the next logical step from here would probably be to look at one of the PlayStation's most iconic developers, you know, the special K1, but unfortunately for you, and more importantly for me as I have to make the video, it turns out Konami made way too many games for the original PlayStation, so instead of you sifting through a few hundred games, most of which are Dance Dance Revolution titles, to see what my thoughts on Metal Gear Solid and Symphony of the Night are, I've decided instead to make a video for the hardcore, the connoisseurs, and most importantly, the freaks. That's right, we're looking at the granddaddy of Japanese game devs, Taito. You might know them as the guys that made Space Invaders, but they also made a whole bunch of other cool stuff as well. And if you were gaming in the arcades from the 70s, 80s, 90s, forever basically, chances are you've played and loved a few Taito games in your time. And while Taito's place in arcade and Japanese gaming history is one of the most storied and revered out there, they were a company whose console game output during the early 3D and CD days never really carried them into the same legendary status internationally that their arcade contemporaries like Namco, Capcom, Sega, and Konami did. And why might that be? Were their games just too rooted in the past, too experimental, too niche, or maybe just too weird to appeal to an international audience? Well, sit back, relax, and get yourself comfy, because we're going to take a look at every single game Taito brought to the original PlayStation, from the games you probably know to the games you probably don't. Get ready for yet another PlayStation extravaganza, served up the long way, as we travel all the way back to the year 1995, where once again the future of computer entertainment was about to change forever. And it starts right now. Now, as always, before we dive right in, I'd just like to preface this video by stating the goal here is to simply take a brief look at every game Taito was involved with on the original PlayStation in order of release. Now, by my calculations, there are a grand total of 52 unique games Taito brought to the original PlayStation. Plenty you're probably familiar with, some of which you might not be familiar with, and some you'll probably be surprised to see in this video, but hey, if it says Taito on the box, it's going on the list. Now, of these 52 games, all but one was released in Japan, which usually doesn't bode well for that one game. Only 19 of these games were released in North America, and in a minor win for the 50Hz crew, we managed to get 23 of these games over in PAL regions. Now, the reason for this big discrepancy between Japan and the Western regions is that Taito didn't publish a single game themselves in the West. They relied solely on Western publishers to localize their games for release over here. Companies like Acclaim, THQ, Midas, JVC, Working Designs, even Sony themselves were amongst some of the companies responsible for getting these games into our hands. And even with those efforts, a huge portion of Taito's PS1 library remain Japan-only exclusives to this day. So if you're not familiar with the Japanese PlayStation library, expect to see some cool shit. Also, just for clarity, this list doesn't take into consideration the various collections and reissues that Taito has released on the console over the years, which, surprise surprise, there is a lot of, but we'll of course take some time to talk about a few of these during the video, and in the case of more notable reissues such as the various 2000 editions of certain games, they'll all be highlighted in the one segment. And finally, version-wise, we'll be opting for the North American versions of these games whenever possible, followed by PAL versions in the case where the games were PAL exclusive in the West, and finally Japanese versions if we gotta play any cool Japanese exclusives, which, as I'm sure you know by now, there is quite a lot of, so buckle up. Anyway, that's enough of that, so let's kick things off with Taito's very first PlayStation game, which asks the very important question: what happens if Knight Rider meets Space Harrier? I'll tell you what happens. Cool shit. That's right, it's a port of the 1989 Taito Z System arcade classic Night Striker, brought to the PlayStation by Ving, a cyberpunk rail shooter done in the super scalar style that is quite similar to Sega's Space Harrier, but instead of playing as a little guy that flies, you're a little guy inside a car that flies. And look, everybody loves a flying car. Now, I'll be honest, I've never been super high on Space Harrier, despite being a big fan of rail shooters and really enjoying the look of Sega's super scalar arcade titles. Any attempts I've made in the past to play Space Harrier have always kind of ended up with me going, yeah, that's pretty fun, I guess. It may just be a case that it's a game a little before my time. Like, if a kid comes up to me today and says Tekken 3 sucks, my gut instinct is to yeet him off a cliff. But in reality, a lot of the time, if you weren't around to experience something in its heyday and you've been overexposed to newer, flashier stuff, it can be kind of hard to go back. I mean, just ask a 50-year-old Brit trying to explain the appeal of Chucky Egg or Dizzy Egg. Brits sure did love eggs, let me tell you. And that's just kind of been my thoughts on Night Striker. I've seen plenty of footage of it over the years and just kind of assumed it'll be another super scalar rail shooter that wasn't for me, but almost immediately upon starting this game and getting blasted with the cool music, punchy sound effects, cyberpunk aesthetic, and the tight controls, I was like, hold on, this shit slaps. Now, I'm a very aesthetics driven guy. Like, if a game simply looks and sounds cool enough, that can be more than enough to pique my interest in some cases, and something about Night Striker just really hits the spot for me, and it also helps that the game is a lot of fun to play. It's a simple, straightforward rail shooter with just one button for your shot, and the rest of the game is really about dodging oncoming hazards and enemy fire, but the addition of little gimmicks like the branching paths at the end of levels, something Taito really loves adding into their games and something they also borrowed from Sega, Outrun in this case, but it's a great mechanic that I love seeing in games, and it also allows for plenty of replayability across a 6-stage run. Additionally, I really love the little score gimmick that gives you extra points whenever your vehicle is in car mode on the ground. Something about it just feels really satisfying to do, and I imagine trying to map out the best places in the game to utilize this alongside blowing up enemies is really fun for score hunters. Me, on the other hand, I'm just doing my best not to die in pretty much every game I play, and well, you know, that's fun enough for me. Also, I really can't stress enough how cool the music in this game is. It was composed by Taito's in-house sound team known as Zumtada, a name you will be hearing a whole bunch during this video, and a sound team that pretty much always delivers the goods.
Standby ready? Good luck.
Now, the thing with Night Striker is that for the longest time, it was a game notorious for having problematic ports. Well, one pretty rough port, that being the Mega CD version, which plays pretty well, but it's not a looker, let's just put it that way. Then there's the Japan-only PlayStation port, which, as my introduction to the game, I thought was pretty great, but it does have a lower frame rate and draw distance than the arcade original, and some minor load times, which, you know, these days is sacrilege to some. Following that, there's the Saturn port called Night Striker S, which increases the draw distance, bumps up the sound quality, and also adds some bonus extra hard levels exclusive to this mode, which is a nice addition. But similarly, this version can't hit the arcade frame rate. In fact, despite the Saturn being a 2D powerhouse, it often struggled with super scalar style games in particular. I mean, just look at Sega's very own Galaxy Force 2, a game from 1988, and one that can't hit 60 FPS on the Saturn, which really shows how far ahead this super scalar stuff was at the time. Lastly, there's a port of Night Striker included in one of the many Taito PS2 collections, this one being the Japan-only Taito Memories 2 Gaikan, which apparently also has a bunch of issues relating to sound, visuals, and whatnot, but honestly these collections pack so many good games in one affordable disc. I don't know, I could play and enjoy these just fine. I mean, as long as you're not a weird nerd on the internet, who really gives a shit? Good news though for weird nerds on the internet, finally a proper arcade perfect port of this game has made it out in August of 2025 as part of the collection Operation Night Strikers from the Gods at M2, which packages not only Night Striker, but also 3 of Taito's classic light gun shooters, Operation Wolf, Operation Thunderbolt, and Space Gun, which is a banger lineup to be fair. And better still, M2 are also working on a brand new follow-up to Night Striker, called Night Striker Gear, which is also scheduled to release sometime in 2025. So as a newcomer to the Night Striker fandom, I gotta say, I got pretty lucky with the timing. So if this looks like your jam, there has literally never been a better time to check out Night Striker, be it the arcade original, or even on the PlayStation, Saturn, or the Mega CD version. Go on, play whichever one you like. I ain't gonna stop you. Next up, we have the first PlayStation exclusive game Taito ever put out, and that's Zeitgeist, or as it was known in the West, Jupiter Strike, a 3D rail shooter. And while a 3D rail shooter from Taito sounds pretty exciting, I'll let you know right now, this is probably the worst game we'll be looking at on today's list. Well, at least the worst one that Taito made. You'll see. So Taito, if you don't know, kind of known for making excellent shooters, and as we've seen, also excellent rail shooters, at least in 2D anyway. Taito's first attempt at a 3D console game, however, well, there was definitely some teething issues. In fact, considering the quality of Taito's releases over the years, you could even say this is an uncharacteristically poor game from the company, where almost every aspect of the thing kind of misses the mark, from the visuals to the gameplay, the audio. Everything here is just kinda bleh. Jupiter Strike kinda tries to give us a 3D representation of their wonderful 2D shooter Ray Force, a game which is known for its excellent target lock system and bendy lasers, and also a game we'll be talking about a little bit later. Don't you worry. But comparing this masterful 2D game to this slow and plodding 3D rail shooter, it's enough to make you think Taito's transition into the next dimension was a sign of the end times. We've got a rough frame rate, unresponsive gameplay, some of Taito's least inspired visual design, even if some of it does shine through a bit later in the game, and honestly what I consider to be probably the worst soundtrack seen in a 90s Taito game. I mean, what is going on here?
Sounds.
This is the kind of game that, at least back in '95, I could see people buying into just because it was one of the earlier polygonal rail shooters on the console, but like, Panzer Dragoon predates this thing, and if you were comparing the Saturn and PlayStation based on these two games, it would be a no contest in favor of the Saturn. Certainly not the worst game ever made, but as I said, by Taito's standards, this is a very rare miss, and luckily one that we can probably chalk up to being their first attempt at a 3D game on new hardware. Our next game, however, is oddly enough not a Taito game, but one that I couldn't skip out on talking about in a Taito episode, and I'm sure you'll understand why. That's right, it's our last game of 1995, PD Ultraman Invaders from Bandai, which, if the name didn't give it away, is essentially Space Invaders, but with an Ultraman skin. Also, it includes a port of the arcade version of Space Invaders, and I know for sure, Taito definitely made that. Now, if you watch the Namco variant of this video, Bandai did a very similar thing with the game Gundam Over Galaxian, which, as the name implies, was Galaxian, but with a Gundam skin. And this right here is essentially the Ultraman and Space Invaders equivalent, which is not only full of fun fan service for Ultraman fans, but a damn good version of Space Invaders in its own right. Now, we'll talk a little more about Space Invaders and its cultural importance a little later in the video, but at the very least, I assume you know how this game works. A row of enemies move back and forward, and you shoot them while utilizing some barriers for your protection. It's as video games as video games can be. And when you add some Ultraman, or Ultramen should I say, a whole bunch of classic enemies, sound effects, and some banging music to the mix, you get PD Ultraman Invaders. The game features a story mode which has you playing through different eras of Ultraman from stage to stage, with new backdrops and enemies also inspired by the era that you're currently playing in. The gameplay here does play it fairly safe with no crazy power-ups or anything like that, but you do occasionally fight bosses who take a few extra hits to take down, and you also have the choice of playing in the traditional full screen style, or this close-up oblique angle, which lets you see those chunky mid-90s digitized sprites in all their glory. Honestly, even as just a quick game to blast through in under an hour, this is a nice variety-filled version of Space Invaders with lots of funny cutscenes and plenty of charm. And of course, for the score hunters out there, you can also play old school endless mode and pick from your fave Ultra Buddy to do it with, and there's even a versus mode for 2-player battles as well. So it's a nice little package, all things considered. It's probably not the best version of Space Invaders out there, or even on the PlayStation for that matter, but for Ultraman fans, I think this game is a no-brainer, and regardless, it's probably the only Space Invaders game to utilize crosses as a defensive barrier, and that in and of itself is really quite funny. Our first game of 96, and one of Taito's deeper cuts on the console, it's Champion Wrestler Jikkyuo Live, a console-exclusive follow-up to their 1989 arcade title, Champion Wrestler. Now, for those who don't know, I'm a pretty big wrestling fan, which sadly means between this and video games, I get to experience two of the most annoying fandoms on the internet, and thanks to this game, I get to experience both of them simultaneously, which hopefully means they will cancel each other out. In all seriousness though, the video I probably get requested to make more than anything is to look at every wrestling game on the original PlayStation, and would you believe it? There's a whole bunch of them, and while I may make that video someday, for now at least we can look at one of them, that being Champion Wrestler Jikkyuo Live, which is a cool 2D sprite-based wrestling game featuring a 3D ring and a whole lot of wrestlers that are definitely not based on real wrestlers. Not a single one of these lads. I mean, if you see them do any moves or taunts that look familiar, that's just pure coincidence. Don't worry about it, this isn't Sabu, it's legally distinct Sabo. This isn't Rick Steiner, it's the Bark Bark Dogman. Now the wrestling gameplay here is quite similar to that seen in the Fire Pro games, but played from a side perspective instead of Fire Pro's isometric style. And honestly, considering how early an example of the genre this is, the gameplay is really quite easy to get into, but also offers up a lot of technical depth for those willing to invest some more time into it. Now the side angle does unfortunately take a little getting used to just for lining up grapples and strikes, but once you get it down, you can pull off all sorts of crazy stuff in this game and live out your strong style fantasies in very satisfying ways. And if you want to learn, there's an in-game tutorial and a pretty robust game facts guide as well, and those always help. The game features support for up to 4 players simultaneously with single, tag, and battle royale modes, and a pretty lengthy single player campaign where you work through the roster on your way to winning the championship belt. And while the game doesn't feature any create a wrestler or character customization, the roster really is quite impressive and has more than enough to keep any 90s wrestling fan busy for quite some time. And maybe the biggest selling point of the game, at least back in the day anyway, is the incredibly enthusiastic Japanese commentary, which is where the live part of the game's title comes into play. I mean, I have no idea what they're saying half the time, but when these lads pop off for a brainbuster or Frankensteiner, you better believe I'm popping off too. So yeah, legitimately a very good early wrestling game on the console, and one I think Fire Pro fans especially should check out. Me on the other hand, I'm just happy to spam Rick Steiner taunts until the cows come home. Sorry, did I say Rick Steiner? Obviously I meant Bark Bark Dogman. I don't want to get sued. Next up, we've got the debut of two things you'll be seeing a lot of in this video: Puzzle Bobble and puzzle games. Seriously, if there's one thing Taito did better than maybe any other developer in this generation, it's puzzle games, and one of their most famous is of course Puzzle Bobble, the bubble shooting puzzle spin-off to Bubble Bobble. You know, the game with the cute green and blue dragons aptly named Bub and Bob. Everybody loves these guys, and rightly so. Now, for some reason, despite Puzzle Bobble being a wonderful name for a puzzle spin-off of Bubble Bobble, the game was renamed to Bust a Move in the West, maybe to attract a hip young audience of young MC fans, who can say? Just bust a move. Unfortunately, this name change did cause a lot of hassle for a future PS1 game called Bust a Move, which had to be renamed to Bust a Groove in the West because, as always, video games are a fucking nightmare. But either way, here's the first version of this classic arcade series to appear on the PlayStation, Puzzle Bobble 2, or Bust a Move 2 Arcade Edition, in the West, a game with possibly the most unnecessarily terrifying North American box art imaginable. The gameplay here is pretty simple. You use your little guy to aim a selection of colored bubbles at a bunch of other colored bubbles at the top of the screen. Fire them off, and if you get 3 or more to match, they burst, netting you some points and ideally dropping a few other loose bubbles in the process, which is how you net big points, and is sadly something I'm quite terrible at. Honestly, this has always been one of my favorite puzzle games just because the mechanics are really satisfying, but I can't stress enough how much I suck at these things. It's quite tragic, really. The modes on offer are the single-player puzzle mode, where you complete a series of set boards one by one and then get to use the Taito favorite branching path system to move on to a new set of puzzles, giving the game plenty of flexibility for future playthroughs. But my favorite mode is, of course, the very popular at the time 1v1 battle mode, which can be played against AI or a human opponent. And as we mentioned in the Capcom video, thanks to the popularity of Puyo Puyo 2 in Japanese arcades, there was a versus puzzle gaming boom, and of course Taito was right there in the trenches with Puzzle Bobble, and at least in my opinion, this is one of the funnest versus puzzlers out there, assuming you have a basic grasp of physics, which clearly I do not. Overall, this is the lightest content-wise and also the most straightforward of the Puzzle Bobble offerings on the console, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, as the later entries can be a little hectic with all their new features. But either way, undoubtedly these classic Puzzle Bobble games are still bursting with addictive gameplay and incredible levels of charm all these years later. So if you like tiny green dragons and colored bubbles, Puzzle Bobble 2 is a very worthwhile addition to any PS1 fan's library. Next up, we have not one, but 2 Taito Laserdisc arcade classics where terrible, terrible things happen to the protagonists. It's Time Gal and Ninja Hayate, which are essentially Taito's answer to Dragon's Lair, or you know, the whole wave of interactive cartoon quick time event games that were very popular in the 80s and make up a large bulk of early CD consoles libraries. And as we're still in the early days of the PS1 library and this style of game was still somewhat in vogue, it makes sense Taito would bring not just 1 but 2 of their classic hits to the console, each on their own separate disc. Now we've looked at a few of these Laserdisc style games in the past and they've been a bit hit or miss generally, but I'm happy to say my time with both Time Gal and Ninja Hayate far exceeded my expectations, so let's check them out in the order I played them in, which is the order they appear on the box. First up, we have 1985's Time Gal, which I'll let you know right away, this is easily the best Laserdisc game I have ever played. Now that's not down to the mechanics or gameplay, which is still very much the same QuickTime formula of hitting a button that appears on screen, or else you'll die a horrible, horrible death. So if this style of gameplay ain't your thing, this still probably won't win you over. However, when it comes to variety, style, charm, and just pure hilarity, I've yet to play anything in this genre that comes close to Time Gal. The premise is simple: you're a cute green-haired anime girl named Reika hopping through time in search of a time-traveling criminal. This means every level or period is a short journey to a different time period, be it prehistoric times with dinosaurs, a cyberpunk future, the Gulf War. Literally anything or anywhere is possible in this game, and thanks to the animation being done by Toei, who, you know, have worked on a few different things over the years, the amount of cool stuff you'll see in this game's rather short runtime is pretty crazy, and it means whether you're succeeding or failing, you're probably gonna be in for a good time. Like, I legit laughed out loud so many times while playing this thing. I mean, look at this clip where you end up in the middle of the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941. Seriously, that's so fucking funny. Oh yeah, you might have also noticed a lot of this game is in English, well, at least the text anyway, and that's because these ports also have English options by default and a whole bunch of other quality of life features too. So on the whole, a great little version of Time Gal here, and a game I legitimately had a blast playing through. Which then moves us on to the second game in this collection, Ninja Hayate, which actually came out a year earlier than Time Gal in 1984, and while this game is also quite good, I really wish I had played it before Time Gal, as it's more or less the same thing, just not as good as Time Gal, but still by Laserdisc standards, it's a really fun time. The story here is that you're a teenage ninja named Hayate trying to invade a big evil castle to save a princess. So in other words, the Japanese equivalent of Dragon's Lair, only with diagonal inputs this time, which caught me off guard quite a bit. The game feels more like a straight line run from one area to the next and was over a bit quicker than Time Gal, but there's still plenty of cool things to see along the way, with the castle itself probably being the star of the show. It does kind of lack the variety and charm of Time Gal, and like I said, had these two not being packaged together and being played back to back, I probably would have enjoyed Ninja Hayate a lot more, but it really is tough following up Reika and all of her funny death scenes. But hey, as a duo pack, having both these rather good examples of the genre packed together is a great deal in my opinion, or at least it was back in the day anyway. Sadly, a lot of people also think these ports are pretty great, hence why they are very expensive to buy nowadays, but you know, what you gonna do? Well, I'll tell you what you could do. You could pick up the Mega CD ports, which are scaled down to accommodate the hardware, but I think there's something really quite charming about these things, especially Wolf Team's version of Time Gal, which I really love on a visual level. Or better yet, you can pick up the quite recent HD remasters of both Ninja Hayate and Time Gal, which might seem a little pricey for how long these games take to beat, but the ports are really solid and also really quite good considering how expensive they are to buy elsewhere, like on the PS1 or the Saturn. I mean, you're getting a pretty good deal really when you think about it. So yeah, at least for now anyway, Time Gal is my new favorite game in this genre, although I've yet to try Road Avenger, which I know people speak quite highly of, and I do like driving cars through shop windows, so chances are I'll dig that too, although probably not as much as Pray God. I mean, I still can't get over that shit. It's so funny. Coming in at number 7, we have Bobble featuring Rainbow Islands, which unsurprisingly is a duo pack including the original Bobble and its follow-up Rainbow Islands. Although surprisingly, this right here is the only game on our list today not to see a Japanese release, which, considering this pack includes some of Taito's most famous games, is a bit weird, right? Well, this port was handled by Acclaim and developer Probe Entertainment Software, which, if you remember back to the Capcom video, were the duo responsible for the PlayStation port of X-Men Children of the Atom, which Japan did also not want because it was very, very bad. Luckily though, in this case, the ports of both Bobble and Rainbow Islands are completely fine from what I can tell. They run well, they sound like they should. If anything, I think it's probably this terrifying CGI opening that stopped it getting a Japanese release. I mean, look at what they did to poor Bub. This right here is criminal.
Prison honey.
As for the games, well, I imagine most of you know Bobble quite well. That and it already appeared briefly in this video, like, I don't know, 2 games ago, so that probably helps. Originally released in arcades in '86, this is one of Taito's most successful and well-known games, and it was the introduction of Bub and Bob, the 2 cutest dragons in all of gaming. The goal is simple: your dragons can shoot bubbles from their mouths, and you gotta trap enemies in said bubbles and then jump into them from above or below to kill them. The more you get in one go, the more points you get, and you basically move from screen to screen doing this and collecting fruit until you reach the end. It's really straightforward, it's a lot of fun even today, and it probably has one of the best video game jingles of all time, which is a good thing since you'll be hearing it quite a lot, but there is no denying this is one of the all-time video game bangers. As for the port, it's very bare bones, but as we've covered in the past, this is the era where simply getting a near arcade-perfect port of a classic arcade title was a novelty in and of itself, so I'm sure people were more than happy to pick up this package for Bobble alone. But good news, we also get its follow-up, 1987's Rainbow Islands in the package too, which now sees the dragons transformed into little humans who shoot rainbows and climb upwards through a series of levels instead of going down. Now, this is a game that I haven't spent anywhere near as much time with. The gimmick is really using these rainbows as both platforms and projectiles to kill enemies and navigate your way through the level, and at least on paper, that doesn't seem as fun to me as, you know, bubble dragons, but I gotta say, this game really won me over the more I played it. Navigation through the levels is a lot of fun, and the variety in worlds and the inclusion of boss battles also made this a nice step up in a lot of aspects, and the tune for this game legit might be as good as the tune in Bubble Bobble. It is really hard to get out of your head. So yeah, as a package nowadays, it's certainly a bit lacking. I mean, Taito didn't really go for the whole Namco Museum or Capcom Generations route of bundling their classic games together. You'd really have to wait for the PS2 era and the Taito Legends collections, which are incredible, as I will say many times throughout this video. But for the time, this was a nice way to play two very fun and addictive arcade hits. And at the very least, it does feature one unique aspect that makes it worth checking out today. And that's an enhanced version of Rainbow Islands, which bumps up the visuals and resolution and kind of makes it look like a very European version of Rainbow Islands, the likes of which you'd see on the Amiga or something, which I think is quite fitting considering this is a British-made port. So yeah, not quite sure why Taito Japan didn't want to release it over there. I'm sure somebody in the comments will tell me the audio frequency is off in these versions by a few hertz, and I'm a moron for not noticing. But hey, it could be worse. I could be somebody who gets irrationally upset in YouTube comments over a game about a little dragon and a fat kid who shoots rainbows. Surely there's nobody out there who'd do that. Moving on from some arcade classics to multi-disc FMV obscurities, next up we have Tokyo Shadow, a 3-disc FMV adventure game largely unknown outside of Japan. Now interestingly, this game is based on a series of novels by author Aya Nishitani, who also wrote the digital Devil Story novels, which the whole Megami Tensei video game series is based on, which, as I'm sure you all know by now, Atlus really ran with as a series and eventually filled it with jazz and talking cats. So how about Taito's take on a series from a dude who really likes writing about demons in Tokyo? Well, it's pretty fucked up. Tokyo Shadow kind of follows the choose your own adventure template, where depending on the choices you make, it'll lead you down a branching path to one of various different endings. But I think your character seems to retain knowledge from certain experiences when replaying through the game, which means on subsequent playthroughs, you'll eventually unlock new options which can lead you to the true endings. Honestly, given the language barrier, it's an incredibly hard game to play through without any knowledge of spoken and written Japanese, but even still, on a production level, you can tell Taito really went all out with this one. I mean, the amount of live action cutscenes, the number of actors, the special effects, it's all delightfully 90s, but you can feel the effort put into this. Of course, there is only so much space on a compact disc, so the majority of navigation through the game is moving from still image to still image, but you are still going to be treated to a whole lot of recorded voice lines, as well as live action and CGI cutscenes, so you won't notice it too much. Also, the music is very Megami Tensei, so Taito certainly nailed the vibe in this one. Honestly, it's a shame this game is locked to Japan, because even from the brief amount of time that I've spent meandering through it just to get a decent variety of footage, it's something I can tell is a cut above most games in this style, at least on a presentation level. It's a game that I'm probably going to add to my fan translation wish list for the future, even just for the Megami Tensei heads. I'm sure they'd be interested in playing a game based on a Nishitani novel outside of the usual Atlus style. That, and the game also uses VHS tapes to select your save file, and I mean, come on, Darius and Layer section cameos, a Taito VHS player, this shit rules. And speaking of shit that rules, here's 1996's Psychic Force, a 1v1 fighter about anime dudes shooting lasers at one another inside a big cube. Needless to say, It's pretty great. So, as I'm sure you all know by now, one of the biggest money makers both in arcades and on consoles during this time period were 1v1 fighters, specifically 3D 1v1 fighters. You know, your Virtua Fighters, your Tekkens, your Toshindens. They were hot, hot, hot. So naturally, if Taito wanted to make a big impact on the console, something they really hadn't done as of yet, they'd need to get into the 3D fighter space. Now Taito, up until this point, had made some pretty good 1v1 fighters and also Dino Rex, but none of that had really changed the culture, so to speak, except for Dino Rex. So Taito, to their credit, always seemed to try something a little different when it came to their games. I'm sure they could have made a 3D fighter in the style of Virtua Fighter or Tekken, but at this stage that market was already kinda locked down, so instead Taito went in a whole different direction, the anime direction, not only giving us a fighter that had characters that stood out from the crowd on a visual level, but also gameplay unlike anything else out there at the time. Essentially, Psychic Force is a 3D fighter on a visual level, but with gameplay played on a 2D plane, and the gimmick is that you're trapped in this square arena, but you can fly and also fire projectiles at one another. If you're far apart, your attacks are a variety of projectiles of different shapes and sizes, and when you're close up, your attack inputs change to close quarter moves. You know, your punches, your kicks, throws, all that good stuff. Honestly, they kinda low-key figured out how to make the perfect Dragon Ball fighting game, but instead of doing that, they just filled it with psychic anime boys and girls, and you know what? It kinda rules, I'm not gonna lie. Now the gameplay here, I'd say, is a whole lot more beginner friendly than some fighters out there. You have 2 attack buttons, one for light or heavy attacks, and firing projectiles and making combos requires little more than just mashing a few buttons. The complexity in Psychic Force really comes in the form of utilizing the game's quick movement, spacing, as well as your character's variety of special inputs, which are also quite easy to pull off by fighting game standards, but can offer up a whole bunch of interesting playstyles depending on the character selected. That and the moves also look really cool too, and you know, that's always nice. All your specials are performed by using Psi energy, and naturally the more powerful attacks require higher and higher amounts of this energy to use, and it's a fun balance of risk and reward when using these attacks, as if you miss a high cost attack, it can leave you with less options down the line, and the whole back and forth between you and your opponent dashing across the screen, trying to predict each other's moves, making sure you don't get smashed into a wall for more painful combos, it's honestly really fun and makes for some very, very intense battles. Now while the gameplay is locked to a 2D plane, this whole thing still feels very fresh and experimental on a gameplay level, and since the visuals have that 3D flair, it still manages to wow on a visual level, even today in my opinion. Now while this game made it to arcades a little earlier in '96 than its PS1 counterpart, this was another game to utilize Sony's ZN1 arcade board, which was spec'd to PlayStation hardware, and Taito had their very own version of this board called the FX1A, which Psychic Force debuted on. So naturally the PS1 port here is more or less arcade perfect, but with some extra features like a story mode and training mode. Still though, it's a little light content wise, at least by later fighting game standards, but even in '96, a fighting game with a story mode was kind of a big deal. Luckily, the Acclaim localization features some absolutely atrocious English voice acting, which, if anything, I think just adds to the whole experience.
Keith, I won't stop until I rescue you.
I want to be loved, but no one loves me. It's a struggle that continues endlessly. Who will save me from this fate? Somebody, help me!
I knew this day would come. Won't you pledge your faith to me once again, Sonia?
Your Sonia is dead. I am Wendy's sister, Chris.
Huh, I see. Well then, as leader of Noah, I shall have to fight you with all my power.
Are you going to be mean to me too?
So much latent power can be dangerous. I must eliminate it before it's too late. I owe everything to Keith. But why do I feel so empty inside?
Mama, kudos for saying that, for spilling, like seriously.
And while I know some people don't love bad English dubs as much as I do because they're dead inside, Acclaim did leave the Japanese animated opening untouched, and if there's one thing this series would be known for, it's banger anime openings, let me tell you.
Nothing to lose, kick up the pride. Count time away, it's such a rush. Until my dying day. 湧き上がる勇気、胸に秘めて。人は皆孤独を思うのか。溢れ出す想い、空に散らし。光放って今走り出すのか。Let me stop make it now.
Also, I can't move along without also mentioning the excellent Zontada soundtrack featured in this game. In fact, the sound design on the whole is excellent in this thing, from top to bottom. It's some really, really good stuff.
Stand up, Wendy!
Ready? Go! Let's do it! Ready?
Child play.
So yeah, that's a look at the very first Psychic Force, a game that didn't really hit it big commercially like other fighters at the time, at least in the West, probably down to how experimental and out there it was, a curse of many Taito games, you could say, but having played it here for the first time myself, I was immediately a big fan of this thing and completely understand why it's considered a cult classic nowadays. Luckily in Japan, however, Psychic Force was a pretty big hit for Taito, and they would continue to capitalize on the series' success and its fun cast of characters like Fireman, Iceman, Rockman, Wind Girl, Electric Girl, and Cool Angel Man, so you can expect more psychic laser blasting fun down the line. Don't you worry. Next up though, we're going to take a look at another Arcade to PS1 port and our token sports game for this episode. Say the line, David. That's right, it's Super Football Champ, the first game to see a PAL only release in the West, because as we know by now, Europeans love a bit of football and also shit PAL box art, but hey, we'll take what we can get. So Football Champ is a series of football games released by Taito in the late 80s and early 90s, and the Super in this version doesn't mean it's a Super Nintendo port, rather it's Super because it's now in 3D, and it's also another game made for the Taito FX1A arcade board, which means it's ported over quite nicely to the PlayStation, and here it is, with all its weird, uncanny player faces intact. Now, like most football titles that originated in the arcade, the gameplay here is pretty simple. The gameplay mostly focuses around the 4 face buttons, which change depending on whether you're attacking or defending, and you can change your team's playstyle using the shoulder buttons. And unlike my previous attempts at learning any early PS1 era arcade style football games, I got the hang of this one pretty quickly and the goals just kept coming, which is always nice. The big gimmick of this game is that while there are 30 international teams to choose from, you can also select from one of 8 ace players who give up their national pride to come play for any team of your choosing, and these lads each have stats that are well above the rest of your players, so you should definitely abuse their powers. And Abuse them, I did. Also, they look really funny, a reoccurring trait for polygonal football men. As for the gameplay, yeah, it's a pretty fun if unremarkable arcade football title. Not good enough to be a classic, but fun enough to dick around in for an hour or two, I'd say. The main issue I have with it is the somewhat close-up and restrictive camera angle, which does make the visuals look quite nice, but it also makes it really hard to see where your players are unless you have this big map up in the bottom of the screen, something I'd rather have off given the choice. But if you want to play this game effectively, you're gonna need it on, let me tell you. Really, my favorite thing about this game is how silly the PAL version's commentary is. I mean, most of the time it's just your standard English announcer style you'd come to expect from other football games, but every now and then the commentator pops off so hard it goes from serious into pure comedy territory.
He shoots! Great header! Goal! Holland takes the lead!
See, that's a fucking professional right there. In fact, I went from playing the PAL release to trying the Japanese original, and I don't know if it was just that I was so used to the PAL version by this stage, but I found the Japanese version a little too fast for my liking. It just felt way more chaotic. I mean, that's the thing with us PAL gamers. Maybe we like things a little bit slower. Maybe we like 50 Hz sometimes. Maybe we like the misery. Either way, a fun little arcade soccer title from Taito, not one I'd go out of my way to seek out, but if you come across it in the wild, it might be worth picking up just for some intense commentator action. Anyway, that's the token sports game done for the video. Now it's time to move on to something way more important: Space Fish. Well, it may be our last game of 1996, but we're going out with a bang, as it's time for the PlayStation debut of one of Taito's most legendary series. It's Darius Gaiden, a port of the 1994 arcade classic and the 5th game in Taito's series of horizontal space shooters where you blow up very large fish. If that sounds a little weird, it's because it is, but it's real fun though. Now, Darius isn't just a series known for its fish, it also utilized a lot of cool gimmicks back in the day to help make it stand out from the crowd, most notably the branching path system from Outrun, which also became synonymous with the series, and during its earlier days, the arcade cab's usage of multiple screens, giving the game not only a huge playfield, but also helping it draw attention due to how massive these things were. Of course, this meant in the process, porting the arcade games to console had some drawbacks, most notably squeezing the game down to fit on one screen. And while even the modern entries of this series still employ this very long screen gimmick in arcades, Darius Gaiden here was the first arcade entry to be built with a single screen in mind, meaning the arcade and home ports are pretty much identical, save for the odd bit of console slowdown, as to be expected. Now, personally, I have a hard time detaching Darius Gaiden from the Sega Saturn, not only because it got a Western release for the Saturn over here, but also if you ended up importing Saturn titles back in the day and really like shoot 'em ups, chances are you'd end up with a copy of Darius Gaiden at some point, and also another really cool Taito shoot 'em up, which we'll talk about in a little bit. In fact, for the longest time, I didn't even know there was a PS1 version of Darius Gaiden, as a lot of the earlier 2D Taito titles of this gen ended up as Saturn exclusives, games like Elevator Action Returns, Bubble Symphony, and even a cool port of Darius 2 that lets you zoom out to replicate the arcade screen length, were all Saturn exclusives, although Bubble Symphony was meant to get a PS1 port at some point, and a prototype was leaked on the internet a little while back, so that's kind of fun, even if it has terrible load times. However, as it turns out, Darius Gaiden did get a Japan-only PS1 port, courtesy of a company called Interbeck. Now, the fact that I hadn't really heard much about this port made me think that there could be a good reason for that, and it was in fact quite bad. But honestly, this is a really good port of Darius Gaiden, and outside of maybe a little more slowdown than the Saturn version, it's a great if bare bones port of the arcade original, which, to be fair, you could say the same about the Saturn version, but hey, with a game this good and action-packed, this is all you need really. Also, this port has a CGI opening, and that's always fun. Now, the core gameplay here is about as solid as a horizontal scrolling shooter gets. It's relatively simple with a basic shot and missile style weapon, but you can collect power-ups that give you, amongst other things, shield or weapon buffs, and after every few weapon buffs, you can even get new, more powerful weapons that can go through enemies or cover a wider range. However, as a catch, you need to buff these weapons up from scratch when you get them, meaning sometimes it's better to hold on to weaker but fully buffed versions of your shots depending on the path you're taking throughout the game. And there are a lot of paths, let me tell you, with 28 different levels of varying degrees of difficulty and a whole bunch of nautical team bosses and super bosses to face at the end. And I mean, everybody's cool until they have to come face to face with Krusty Hammer, you know what I mean? Also, you have screen clearing bombs that make the screen freak out in a good way, and at least puts my flashing warning at the beginning of the video to good use. There's also this fun capture mechanic that allows you to take control of some of the game's mid-bosses and have them fight alongside you, which is pretty neat, although this is something that wouldn't really see its full potential until the next entry in the series, which we'll get to in time, but even still, it's cool to see an earlier iteration of it here present in Darius Gaiden. Now, most shoot 'em up fans out there will tell you this game is one of the all-time greats, and from a gameplay perspective alone, I think that's absolutely the case. But the reason I love Darius Gaiden, and this whole series really, is that it's so freaking weird and out there. Like, just on an aesthetics level, the way this game both looks and sounds is just so memorable and distinct to me. It can border on pure psychedelia at times, and as a soundscape, unlike any other shooter out there. Everything from the boss sirens and the enemy screams to the incredibly dreamy and sometimes unsettling music, it is also distinctly Darius. And the way this game in particular matches up the music to the action on screen is so goddamn good. Nobody was doing it like Taito back in the day. So all in all, Darius Gaiden is pure top-tier horizontal shooter action from a dev team who weren't afraid to be experimental and out there. It's a beautiful and unforgettable video game, and one that I highly recommend everybody experience at least once in their life, be it on the PlayStation, Saturn, or the many other ways you can play it nowadays. It is truly one of the greats, and luckily this also won't be the last we'll see of Darius on the console, and things get even weirder in that one, but at least the shooter fans won't have to wait too long for another banger, because honey,
you've got a big storm coming.
Kicking off 1997, we have one of Taito's defining games on the console, and that's RayStorm, a 3D vertical scrolling shoot 'em up and the second game in the much loved Ray's series of shooters. So as we've just seen, Taito sure know how to make a good horizontal scrolling shooter, and would you believe it, they sure know how to make a good vertical scrolling shooter too. I mean, they made the first shoot 'em up after all, so who better than them, am I right? Well, around the same time as Taito delivered Darius Gaiden, they gifted the world with a little game called RayForce, a 2D vertical scrolling shoot 'em up and the first game in the Ray series. Sadly, unlike Darius Gaiden, this game did not get ported to the PlayStation, but it did get ported to the Saturn, where it saw an incredible number of name changes. Layer Section for the Japan release, Galactic Attack in North America and Europe, and then Gunlock for the European arcade release. It's a bit of a mess, so we'll just refer to it as the intended name, RayForce, going forward. But yeah, this right here, maybe my favorite vertical shooter of all time. Definitely my favorite Saturn shooter, and often considered a masterpiece by the shoot 'em up fans out there. Easily one of the best examples of a classic shmup before the dawn of bullet hell and wacky treasure games at least. The gameplay is really straightforward, with the main gimmick being the painted target system, which is quite similar to those that you'd see in rail shooters throughout the 90s, rewarding you for painting as many targets as you can in one go, and thanks to some dazzling trademark bendy lasers and sound effects, this mechanic is just so goddamn satisfying to use. Throw in some top tier 2D visuals, scaling and sprite work, and a frankly god tier soundtrack from Tamayo Kawamoto, who left Capcom to join Taito and the Zuntata sound team, and you have what I consider one of the shoot 'em up holy grails. It's just a banger from start to finish. So a few years later, in '96, Taito returned with the second entry in the Ray series, RayStorm, which expands on the gameplay seen in Ray Force and notably shifted from 2D to fully 3D visuals, one of the first major shoot 'em ups of this era to do so. And of course, since the arcade version was also built on a new upgraded Taito board, the FX1B, which was also based around PlayStation hardware, the PS1 port is quite the banger. Now, the big thing that always stands out to me when playing this game is how much of a spectacle it is on a visual level. Like, even for an early 3D game, Taito really took advantage of the move to a 3D space, providing all these cinematic flourishes that really up the grandeur and epicness of this game. Now, the major changes to the gameplay compared to Ray Force are the introduction of a bomb-style weapon, which believe me, you're gonna need, and also a second ship with a lightning-style weapon that can also chain from enemy to enemy, allowing two distinct playstyles to mix things up. Also, you can now lock onto any enemy in this one, not just enemies below you like in Ray Force, and similar to that game, the key to big points is big chains. The more enemies you can chain together and destroy in one go, the bigger your score. It's simple, it's satisfying, and it's an absolute blast to play. Also, Tamayo Kawamoto returns once again from the music, and look, if you see a game with Ray in its name from Taito, you can guarantee the music is gonna be banging. Now, this PS1 port also features a cool extra mode, which changes up the enemy patterns and color palettes from stage to stage, which is quite nice, but it also features a fully arranged soundtrack, which means you somehow get even more banging music, and you know what? You love to see it. Now, one thing I must highlight is that the North American port of this game came from working designs, which means the physical packaging is banging as always, but alas, there is some meddling done in the working designs version of this game, namely increasing the game's difficulty by quite a bit. Now, at the default difficulty, which is 3 by the way, this is already, in my opinion, one of the hardest shoot 'em ups on the PlayStation, but in the North American version, the difficulty is bumped up to 5 by default, and worse yet, working designs added one of those difficulty blocks, which means if you bump the difficulty down below 5, you can't progress beyond the 4th stage, which is something I just really hate. Now, luckily the Japanese and PAL versions don't have this issue, so if you're gonna check this game out, I'd recommend the Japanese version personally, since you get the intended difficulty and the full 60 FPS experience. So all in all, while I personally like Ray Force that little bit more, mostly because RayStorm is legit crazy hard, this is easily one of the best shoot 'em ups on the PlayStation, not just in the gameplay department, but as a visual and audio feast. There is little else like it, well, except for the next game in the series, but we'll get to that in time. Also, finally, I'd just like to highlight that this game also got a port to the Saturn, exclusive to Japan under the title Layer Section 2, and while this port obviously suffers a bit in the visual department and doesn't feature the extra mode, I also really like this version of the game. People tend to give Saturn 3D a hard time, especially for its transparencies, but something I love about this gen is how distinctly different Saturn, PlayStation, and N64 3D is. I mean, it really gives each console's version of a multi-platform title its own distinct personality, and while the PS1 version of RayStorm is obviously the better of the two, I do really like the way the Saturn version looks, and just because there's a better version out there, it doesn't mean this still isn't one of the best shoot-'em-ups on the console in my opinion, and also one of the rare fully 3D shoot-'em-ups on it as well. So if you're looking for a good shooter on the Saturn or PlayStation, don't sleep on Layer Section 2 or RayStorm or whatever they were calling it that day. Seriously, this whole Ray naming scheme gets very confusing. Speaking of which, hot on the heels of RayStorm, we have Ray Tracers, which confusingly has no relation to the Ray series of shooters whatsoever. But hey, I guess Taito were really trying to make Ray happen, and I bet they were really pleased when playing Sons of Liberty. Now, as is tradition, to achieve big success on the PlayStation, all Japanese arcade devs eventually have to deliver a 3D fighter and a 3D racer, and as we've already seen with Psychic Force, Taito were certainly doing their own thing, and surprise surprise, their first racing game, not really a racing game at all. It's more so a game about driving cars into other cars at very high speed, and also tanks and helicopters and stuff. Why is a car driving into a helicopter that's hugging the ground and flying backwards? Well, there's a simple answer for that. Video games. Don't worry about it. So this game bears a lot of similarities with an earlier arcade Taito hit from the 80s called Chase HQ, where the goal wasn't to win a race, it was to crash into a criminal's car a bunch of times and then arrest them, while also looking very cool in that classic 80s Vice Cop style. Needless to say, it was a lot of fun. And since we're now in the far off future of the 90s, we more or less have the same thing here in Ray Tracers, only now it's in 3D, and your car can take out tanks and stuff. Once again, needless to say, I think this game is pretty sweet. You can choose between 4 different racers, each with their own cool color-coded car, and then you drive through a series of stages with the goal of each being to reach the end as quickly as possible while smashing up every car that's in your way for big points. Once you reach the end, you fight a boss, and then you move on to the next stage, with each one featuring progressively trickier routes and hazards to avoid. It's a very simple arcade-style racer with some pretty basic handling and nitro mechanics, and all in all, a single playthrough probably won't take you longer than half an hour, but as a way to kill half an hour, this game sure does hit the spot. The vibe and aesthetic is on point, the game has CGI endings for each of the characters, there's a separate racing and time trial mode for some extra content, and even some unlockable racers with their own very cool cars. And once again, on a visual and audio level, this is some really good stuff for an early 97 PlayStation game. I mean, check out the reflections in the car windows while racing. No other game on the console was doing this stuff back in the day. So yeah, while maybe not the most content-rich game on the console, if you're looking for an arcade racer that's great fun for pick up and play sessions, packed full of style, and legit trying something different in the gameplay department, Ray Tracers is an easy recommendation for me. Although, to be fair, I'd feel weird not recommending a game where you drive cars into tanks and jet planes. I mean, that shit just speaks to my soul. Next up, we have another Japan-only exclusive, and it's Fighter's Impact, a port of the 96 FX1B fighter, and probably the closest Taito would get to putting a traditional 3D fighter on the console. And I say closest because, once again, this is a weird-ass video game. Now, while Fighter's Impact would be published by Taito, it was actually developed by a company called Polygon Magic, who you might be familiar with thanks to other PlayStation titles such as the Family Disaster and Ska Simulator, Incredible Crisis, the I'm Psychic and Having a Very Bad Time Simulator, Galarians, and the I'm Cell-Shaded and Love Fighting and Playing DDR Simulator, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters, one of my favorite fighters on the console, and also a game with one of the hardest soundtracks ever. Well, all the way back in '96, Polygon Magic would give us their very first game, Fighter's Impact, a pretty standard looking 3D fighter on the surface, albeit a very nice looking one, and also one that runs at 60 frames per second. But what really makes Fighters Impact stand out from the crowd is its fighting gameplay. You see, Fighters Impact utilizes something known as the motion slide combo system, which basically means you can combo literally any attack into another attack, as long as you don't use an attack that you've previously used. You see this little bar under a character's health? Each yellow block represents a new move used during a combo, and if you use a duplicate move, it flashes red and you get stunned briefly as punishment. It's a very unusual and interesting take on a combat system for a 3D fighter, especially during this era, and honestly, when you get it down, it's quite a lot of fun. Better still, things get even more experimental with the characters' different movesets. That's right, most of the roster has multiple fighting styles that you can select from, each with their own movesets as well, and while the fighting styles are shared amongst some of the characters and their pool of moves aren't really that deep, with the free flow combo system, it's very rewarding to learn a character and pull off some big moves. Of course, there are some unlockable boss characters with only one moveset, but hey, not everybody's born to be a wrestler, you know? Honestly, on the whole, while I wouldn't consider this the best fighter in the world, I really like how experimental it is on a gameplay level. It legit offers up something very different from the norm, and on an audio and visual level as well, things are pretty fun here too. We've got the odd bit of psychedelia and a banging Zuntata soundtrack, so even though this is a polygon magic joint, this still very much screams Taito, and it's all the better for it. Now, while this game was a Japan-only exclusive, it does have an interesting history beyond this PS1 release, not only because it got an arcade-only revision called Fighters Impact A, which removes the motion combo system and just turns it into a normal fighter, which kind of removes the soul of the game in my opinion, but more notably, this game would see a complete and total reskin and Western release under the name Versus, which uses the same engine and combat system, only now published by THQ. And this thing is so bizarre. It is Fighters Impact, but also nothing like Fighters Impact. It's got new characters, a gang-based squad system, a licensed soundtrack full of techno, industrial, and ska music. It's really kind of crazy. Also, for the Slap Happy Rhythm Busters fans, a bunch of characters from that game would first make an appearance here in Versus as weird, almost proto versions of their Slap Happy selves. I mean, Oleg and Oreg, two completely different guys, right? This is the kind of shit you'll only come across if you're deep in the PS1 trenches, and my god, am I in deep. I'd probably recommend Fighters Impact over Versus just because I much prefer the characters and visual style in that game, but Versus is still a very interesting and unusual fighting game in its own right, so maybe check that out too if you're interested or just want to fight a pimp for some reason. In fact, just check out all of Polygon Magic's games. They're easily one of the most experimental and out there devs on the PlayStation, and it's nice to see them pop up briefly in this Taito video. Next up, however, we have something you'd definitely expect to show up in a Taito video, and also a game that has already definitely shown up and will almost definitely show up again. Well, it only took 14 games, but we finally made it to our first official Space Invaders release, assuming you don't count that Ultraman game, which we won't. It's Space Invaders, or as it's more commonly known, Space Invaders 97, which confusingly is also what people call the 97 Super Nintendo version of Space Invaders. As always, video games, a fucking nightmare. So, Space Invaders, a game that I don't think needs any introduction, but I'm gonna do it anyway. This 1978 arcade title is, in my opinion, probably the single most influential video game of all time. I mean, if we were playing Pictionary and I was asked to draw a representation of video games, it would be this little guy right here. This, in my mind, is the embodiment of video games. Released by the Taito Corporation and designed by Tomoshiro Nishikado, on the surface, Space Invaders may not seem like much nowadays, but this thing was revolutionary in its day. You see, up until this point, video games essentially replicated real-life things. You know, Pong, football, tank, cowboy, crippling depression, that kind of thing. Space Invaders, on the other hand, represented a whole new world where you blasted into space to defend Earth from a series of cute alien invaders. Not only was it something legitimately different in the video game space, it was also the first endless arcade game, one that could be played indefinitely if you were good enough. And when I tell you this thing was a hit, my god, was it a hit. No video game was as big a moneymaker as Space Invaders. This thing was everywhere, in bars, restaurants, supermarkets, laundromats. They even had arcades that were legit only filled with Space Invader cabs. It was basically the entire arcade scene all by itself. And not only was this thing the very first shoot 'em up ever made, it also kicked off the golden age of the arcade scene, making people realize how profitable video games could be. And probably most important of all, it was the first big video game success from Japan, legitimizing the video game scene in the country and causing huge amounts of investment when people realize its potential. And while there are plenty of video games out there that are arguably more important and influential in terms of their design and what they did for the medium as a whole, this is the game that inspired your favorite game creators to start making games. Miyamoto, Kojima, Carmack and Romero, what game ignited their love of the medium? That's right, it was Space Invaders. The people who made the games that created genres and inspired millions of game makers out there, this is the game that inspired them. And that's why I think there's no video game more legendary and influential than this one, the humble little space shooter game with the cute aliens. And here it is on the PlayStation in all its pixelated glory. Now this release is a collection of the different arcade variants of the original game. Well, 4 of them anyway: black and white cocktail cab, color strip cocktail cab, space background stand-up cab, my personal favorite, and finally colored sprite cocktail cab. Each version of the game is the exact same on a gameplay level, but it is nice to have the different versions of the original available, so if you had a specific one that was important to you back in the day, it was nice to have that here alongside all the others in one package. And I also like the version select menu too. It's a minor thing, but it does have a lot of personality. As for Space Invaders itself, it's not a game I go out of my way to play very often, but if I ever see it in an arcade, I'm always happy to give it a few runs, which I can't really say the same for many older arcade titles. Personally, if I'm in the mood for some Space Invaders Extreme is the Space Invaders for me, which is like if Space Invaders took a load of MDMA and absorbed a copy of Res. And that may sound like a pretty extreme analogy, but hey, extreme is in the name after all. Now, while the arcade ports do make up the bulk of this disc, the real star of the PlayStation version is Space Invaders Battle, which is a 1v1 version of Space Invaders that mimics the popular versus puzzle genre that was all the rage at the time, only now in Space Invaders form. And yeah, this is a fun and frantic little version of Space Invaders that really does make this PlayStation version stand out in the Space Invaders lineage and would make for a great little competitive game for any shoot 'em up fan. Also, the music in it features a bunch of Loretta Holloway samples, who, if you don't know, is probably the most sampled singer of all time and something that almost definitely would have got Taito in trouble if this game was released in the West, but it sure does make for banger battle mode music. Well, that's Space Invaders on the PlayStation, a nice collection of arcade ports, and a cool new mode too. Also, this gives us a chance to talk about our first of the 2000 series of reissues. A few of the games we'll be looking at today received these, and essentially they're the same as the original releases, only with some minor tweaks, DualShock support, and if you're lucky, maybe even some extra modes. And in this case, the 2000 edition of Space Invaders sees the addition of a time trial mode, which has some new visuals and adds a little bit more bang for your buck, although that versus mode does have new background music that replaces the Loretta Holloway track, because that was bound to catch up on Taito eventually. At least the new track is a banger, so it's not too bad. So yeah, unless you care about the Loretta Holloway music, which, let's be fair, I'd understand if you did, the 2000 release of Space Invaders is probably the one to go for. Although that being said, there is one more version of this game that does have a notable addition, that being the Simple Series release of this game, Simple 1500 Series Volume 73, The Invader. It rolls right off the tongue. This 2001 release includes all the modes and music seen in the 2000 version, but also this new edition, a fun 3D version of Space Invaders with some cool camera angles and backgrounds. So maybe this Simple Series variant is the best of the bunch. Either way, I think Space Invaders fans are covered nicely on the console with this collection, but worry not, there is one more Space Invaders release still to come, and it's an interesting one. Let's just put it that way. Next up, however, we have another blast from Taito's past, and this one's got balls. That's right, it's everybody's favorite breakout clone that isn't called Alleyway. It's Arkanoid, and it's returning in Arkanoid Returns, a port of the 1997 arcade game and the fourth entry in the series. Originally appearing in the 80s and becoming a huge hit for Taito at the time, this clone of Atari's Breakout notably used a paddle controller in arcades, and is probably the most well-known and successful game of this style in Japan. Naturally, this 97 version of the game follows the same formula, but with a whole bunch of new additions, from new block types to power-ups and downgrades that both help and hinder you. Honestly, it's quite a hectic version of the game, especially as somebody who instinctively panics at the activation of any multi-balls, but it sure is a fun time all the same. Of course, while you can play this game with a regular controller, this style of game is at its best when using a mouse or ideally a paddle controller, which luckily this game supports both of, and once again gives me the opportunity to highlight the Namco Volume paddle controller, which has shown up plenty of times in my videos by now, and I am still yet to acquire one in the flesh because I'm too busy wasting my money on stupid stuff like food and shelter and Wonder Swans. This PlayStation port features the arcade version's levels, but also an extra mode that features some console exclusive levels and a whole new block type to spice things up. There's also an edit mode if you feel like making your own levels, which is quite nice, and even a squash mode for some versus action. Overall, it's Arkanoid alright, and if you like your block breakers, this is one of the most traditional, content-rich, and polished on the console, so it's an easy recommendation for any fan of the genre. This is also another game that received a 2000 reissue as Arkanoid Or 2000, and the major inclusion here is once again analog and vibration support, although online some sites including Wikipedia list this version as the only one that includes the extra and editor modes, as well as the Namco volume controller support, but these modes, as you've seen, are in fact included in the original version, and I've also confirmed online that the original version does support the volume controller too, so I actually think that might be a mistake that nobody has bothered to correct, but if in doubt, the 2000 release is probably the one to go for, just in case. Either way, if you like breaking blocks and fighting ominous space Maui heads, Arkanoid Returns on the PlayStation has got you covered. Next up, we have the Arcade Gears release of Puli Rula, a port of the 1991 Taito arcade original. Now, if you've watched the Capcom video, you might remember another Arcade Gears release, that being 3 Wonders, and I guess the company behind these, Zing, who are, I guess, different to Ving, planned to release a few of these, but sadly there was only ever 2, those of course being 3 Wonders, and our next game, Puli Rula, a very surreal beat-em-up from Taito, and also one of the most memorable games that I've ever played. It's a game mostly known for how absolutely insane it is on a visual level. I mean, stylistically and aesthetically, not only is it a very pretty game taking place in this beautiful pastel-colored fantasy land, but the further you move into the game, the more things begin to unravel and just make you feel like you're losing your mind. But in a good way. Also, if you hit the door in between a pair of giant legs, a pink elephant pops out. And I think that's beautiful. As for the story and gameplay, well, a bad guy appears one day and stops the flow of time, and it's up to you, little boy or little girl, to solve things with your magic stick. This involves you going around from stage to stage and popping people with said stick, or utilizing a Golden Axe style magic system, which seems to summon stuff at random. Anything from a tornado to a bunch of animals in a stampede to a little purple guy. Honestly, anything can happen in this game. It's the definition of video games. Don't worry about it. Now, while the combat here is admittedly quite simple, I mean, there's no combos or anything, it's straight up just bopping and magic, it does have a pretty fun scoring system where all the defeated enemies turn into cute little critters, and if you collect them, you get points. But the further the critters manage to run across the screen before you collect them, the bigger the points you'll get. And just playing around with this mechanic combined with the wild and unpredictable visuals makes this a really fun playthrough for fans of beat-em-ups or just bizarre-ass video games. And also snails, there's a lot of snails in this game. Now granted, this version here is just a bare bones port of the arcade original with no extra features, but it is a very solid port, so if you've yet to try Pulirula and have 30 minutes to kill, this Arcade Gears port, or any of the many versions out there nowadays, are well worth checking out. Just make sure to free the pink elephant when you do. Next up, we have a game that not many people seem to know exists, but will probably be very happy to learn that it does. It's Psychic Force Puzzle Taisen, which is essentially Puzzle Bobble, but with a Psychic Force skin. And to be fair, at the time, two of Taito's most popular titles over in Japan were Puzzle Bobble and Psychic Force, so why not combine the two together? And as a longtime fan of Puzzle Bobble and a new fan of Psychic Force, I gotta tell you, this is pretty incredible. This version of the game seems to be based off of the same engine as Puzzle Bobble 2, so everything present here is more or less the same as that game content-wise, only now instead of little dragons, we have the cast of Psychic Force in little chibi sprite form, which we love to see. Now, I say it's mostly the same, but the puzzle mode from 2, where you select different branching paths, has changed up to offer different puzzles per character, and completing sets with that character unlocks art in the gallery, which is very nice to see. Of course, the main draw here is still the 1v1 battle mode, which also features some fun voiced encounters between the characters, all in Japanese of course, but there's definitely some nice fan service here. You also get to move along a little map screen, and that's always something I'm happy to see. Also, the game features remixes of the Psychic Force soundtrack and some weird liminal background visuals. Not really sure what's going on here, but I do dig it. And of course, most important of all, this game also features a brand new, fully animated opening movie, which every Psychic Force game on the PS1 is destined to get, no matter how big or small. So yeah, while probably not the best version of Puzzle Bobble out there, this is still a very good version of Puzzle Bobble, and thanks to the Psychic Force skin, it's easily one of the most unique variants of the game out there. And if you happen to be a fan of both series, this thing right here is easily a must-own title on the console. Better still, this game also comes packaged with a bonus fan disc that includes a lot of really fun stuff, not just for Psychic Force fans, but Taito fans too. For one, it includes a selection of music tracks from different Taito games that we've already looked at, like Darius and RayStorm, and also a track from the greatest game of all time, Gamera 2000, which isn't a Taito game sadly, but Zuntata did make the music for it, so seeing it here is a welcome surprise. Also, the disc has a bunch of trailers for other Taito games, all of which we've looked at already, although one trailer in particular is announcing a teaser for the upcoming follow-up to Psychic Force, which we'll be talking about in time, so get excited for that. Although easily the funnest thing on this disc are a collection of voice lines from the Psychic Force cast, which have been recorded specifically for you to use as the answering message on your phone or your alarm at home. So you can straight up pick your favorite Psychic Force character, stick your phone up to the TV, and then record Burn yelling at people who try to call you. It's such a cute and 90s thing to have, but I love it so much.
Yahoo! いつも電話してくれてありがとう。だけどごめんね。ちょっと今電話に出られないんだ。
Honestly, between this fan disc and the puzzle game itself, this is a great little package and one that's really flew under the radar, I think. So if you're in the mood for some psychic puzzle action or just need an anime twink to record a message for your answer machine, well, you know what to do. Keeping up the Puzzle Bobble streak, we have Puzzle Bobble 3DX, also known as Bust-A-Move 3DX in PAL regions, or Bust-A-Move 99 in North America, because unsurprisingly it came out in 99 over there, and look, we already fucked up the name once, so why not do it again? Now this is actually an enhanced port of Puzzle Bobble 3, hence the DX part of it. The Saturn got the base version of the game a little earlier in 97, while the PlayStation and N64 got the enhanced versions a little bit later down the line in 97 and 98 respectively. So what's new in Puzzle Bobble 3? Well, for the most part, gameplay is still the same, only with one major difference being the bubbles are no longer pushed down from the ceiling like in previous entries. Instead, they now operate around these node-style blocks, which get moved down as you mess up, and as always, I mess up a ton. Also, the game now allows you to pick your characters in versus mode and features a bunch of characters from other Taito arcade hits. I mean, have you ever wanted to play as Sonic Blastman? I know I haven't, but it's nice that you can. Look at that smile. What a guy. There's also the addition of new bubble types like the rainbow bubble that enhance the gameplay options a little bit further. It's basically what you'd expect from a puzzle game follow-up. It keeps the gameplay intact and offers you the modes you're used to, but with a few new additions to keep things fresh. As for the DX editions, the major changes here are some enhanced graphics, which certainly do make the game look a bit nicer, especially compared to the earlier entries, and I especially love the little intro scenes between the characters in battle mode. I really do love a reference, and this game is packed full of them. Also, this version adds an editor similar to what we've seen in Arkanoid Returns, allowing you to make your own puzzles if you're so inclined. Always a nice addition to see. Also, this feature isn't present in the PlayStation version, but the N64 port of this game also has a 4-player versus mode, and that is pretty sweet. So yeah, all in all, it's more Puzzle Bobble, but newer and shinier and with cute new sprites for Bub and Bob, which is probably the most important thing, at least for me, a noted fan of Bub and Bob. Is it my favorite Puzzle Bobble entry on the console? Well, now that I'm aware of the existence of Psychic Force Puzzle Bobble, that's hard to say, but there is one more Puzzle Bobble game on the horizon, so we'll withhold judgment until we reach that one. Next up, however, we have what will unarguably be one of the fan favorite games from this episode, because it's got cute anime girls, and more importantly, frog-to-frog combat. That's right, it's Magical Day Doki Doki Kokuhaku Daisakusen, a port of the 1996 arcade hit and a game that made a very brief appearance during the Capcom video, mostly because it features a frog fighting minigame. And look, any excuse to talk about frog fighting is a good one. In fact, between trying this game and my past experiences playing other Taito PS1 games, which are pretty much always good, this was the main reason I wanted to talk about Taito as the next dev for this series, because they make very fun video games and also very weird video games that also happen to be fun. So Magical Day is another game that ran on the FX1A board, which, if you're keeping up, is the earlier variant of the board, not the newer FX1B board, which I assume isn't confusing at all. And this game right here is an arcade dating game, which, if you remember back to the Capcom video, was a genre that was pretty popular, not only in homes, but also in the arcade, assuming you could combine dating into a genre that fit into the arcade. Now, Capcom managed to make it work in the confines of a quiz game with Quiz Naniro Dreams, and Taito, well, they managed to make it work by combining it with a collection of short minigames that are often, in the classic Taito style, absolutely unhinged. The aim of the game is to pick from one of 3 polygonal girls and take them on a date to try and woo them. Of course, while this does involve talking to the girls, answering some questions, picking outfits for them, and also taking pictures of them, which is, you know, kind of weird depending on who you ask. Me personally, I'm just here for all the weird minigames that pop up in the middle of this whole dating process. I mean, no offense to the girls, I'm sure they're lovely, but I've got frogs to inflate, you know? So the game plays out on this sort of game board where you move from spot to spot, and depending on the spot that you land on, you'll get a minigame to play. Now, some of these games are quite simple, like finding the matching pairs, tracking a hidden object, or counting the little number of guys in a frying pan, you know. the usual stuff. Although some of these are a lot more fun and out there, like using this polygonal head to shoot lasers at incoming objects, or flying a seagull through some hoops, or of course the star of the show, the frog fighting minigame, which has become somewhat of a legend in fighting game circles. I mean, in Japan, folks have ran tournaments for this thing and have narrowed down the exact characters and inputs to select this game first every single time you boot it up, and it's a beautiful thing to see. I mean, sure, the gameplay in it is pretty simple, but it's pretty much everything that it needs to be. It's kind of like the game Dive Kick, but with frogs, and thanks to the low poly visual style and 60 FPS gameplay, it just has a vibe to it. I don't know what else to say. It's the type of thing that most normal people wouldn't care about, but some people would be obsessed over. And the fact it's just a small part of a very bizarre game that also happens to feature a whole bunch of other very bizarre games, I don't know, I think it's just a wonderful thing. It's why I like Taito as a developer so much. This entire thing is just so strange, but it's also fun, really well made, and it just somehow works so well. Is it the best dating game ever made? Probably not. Is it the best minigame collection ever made? Also, probably not. But when your game is this unhinged and you can also gift a girl a nice dress, I mean, what else do you need really? Oh, you also want to see the girls dance the pop songs? Sure, why not? So yeah, truly one of the funniest and most unhinged games that I've played on the PlayStation, and while the dating aspect of it isn't really my thing, the silly minigames are very much my jam, and despite it being a Japan-only release, if you don't know the language, you can still definitely fumble your way through this one and have a good time. So if it seems like something you'd be into, or just want to run some 1v1 frog battles at your next locals, Magical Date is a game well worth checking out. Coming in at number 21, we have Side by Side Special, Taito's take at an honest-to-God arcade racer, by which I mean you'll actually be doing some racing this time and not crashing into tanks. Now, this game I've covered on the channel previously as part of my Japan-only series, and good news, it's very good. This game here combines the cars and tracks from the arcade versions of Side by Side and its follow-up Side by Side 2 to give us this PS1 version Side by Side Special. Now, what sets this game apart from other big arcade racers on the console is its use of fully licensed Japanese cars, and quite a lot of them by the way, and also its focus on toge-style drift racing. So if you like Japanese tuner cars and drifting around mountains, this is the game for you. Really, as a package, especially by 97 standards, there's really a lot to love here. Not only do we have one of the more graphically impressive racers you'll see on the console, but there are a ton of visually distinct tracks with locales based around different parts of Japan, a banging soundtrack that forgoes the techno and electronic music seen in a lot of racers of this era and gives us a smoother rock and jazz infused soundtrack, which I think alongside the visuals gives this game a really distinct vibe. The gameplay here also feels very different to some other arcade racers I've played on the console. It's very drift heavy, similar to Ridge Racer, but the skill ceiling here I feel is much higher with the weather conditions, narrow tracks, and also the variety of different vehicles, each offering a lot of variance throughout the game. It can be kind of tough to get into and master, but there's a lot here for people willing to put in the time. I'll leave a link to my full review in the description if you want to get a more in-depth explanation of the game and its quirks, but suffice to say, it's another easy recommendation from me. Also, this is another game that features a 2000 edition re-release, which this time around adds vibration support and makes the game's clock a little bit tougher. There's also reports that this 2000 release added Negicon support to the game, but since earlier releases on the console like Ray Tracers had Negicon support, and the online info for these 2000 version releases seems to be a little bit all over the place in terms of accuracy, it might actually be something present in the original version as well. So I don't know. As always, when in doubt, when given the choice, the 2000 version is probably your safest bet. Also, it's probably worth mentioning that Side by Side is a series that led into Taito's other very popular arcade racing series, Battle Gear. So if you're looking for more Taito arcade racing fun, those games also come highly recommended, and there's a bunch of them on the PS2, which we love to see. Anyway, next up we have our final game of 97, and the PlayStation debut of one of Taito's most successful and legendary series, and it didn't even need to leave Japan. That's right, it's the PlayStation debut of Densha de Go, a Japan-only port of the 1996 arcade train simulator that took the entire country by storm, and also ended up becoming the single most successful series in Taito history. Well, after Space Invaders of course, but seriously, for a train simulator that is still to this day mostly exclusive to Japan, that's quite the feat. So every company we've looked at so far in this style of video has a series that kind of defines them during this period. For Psygnosis it was Wipeout, for Namco it was Tekken, for Capcom it was Resident Evil, and for Squaresoft it was, well, still just Final Fantasy, but now in 3D and with a giant budget. For Taito, it was Densha de Go, the 1996 train simulator that instantly became a massive hit, not only in arcades, but also on home consoles too, where a version of this game appeared on pretty much everything from the PlayStation to the Saturn, the N64, and even on handheld consoles like the Neo Geo Pocket, the Game Boy Color, and the WonderSwan, a console where I played this game almost far too much. Of course, the platform that's seen the most Densha de Go games during this period was the PlayStation, so we'll be digging into this series quite a bit over the course of this video, so I hope you like trains. So in the 80s and 90s, Taito were actually kind of ahead of the curve when it came to simulation-style arcade games, most notably with flight sims like Top and Midnight Landing, and in the early 90s, a pitch was made to look at the potential of making an arcade train simulator, something which was shelved at the time, mostly because some higher-ups in the company thought trains might be a bit dull and boring for an arcade title, although thanks to the company also having a number of fairly big dedicated train fans, the project was eventually revitalized in 96, and a little while later the first Densha de Go appeared, alongside a cool arcade cab complete with controller that mimics an actual train cab, only greatly simplified of course. And here's the PlayStation port, which of course also came with an optional novelty controller to simulate the joy of driving a train in Japan, and also hitting the brakes way too hard and ruining somebody's day. The aim of this game is quite simple. You pick from one of 4 trains, each representing a real line around Japan, and each one also usually more difficult than the last, and the goal is to make it to each of the stops on said line, not only on time, but also without breaking any rules or laws along the way, which all sounds easy enough, right? Well, turns out driving a train isn't that easy. Not only do you have to carefully manage your speed and braking, which, you know, when you consider the weight of these massive trains does take a little while to get down, but you've also got to prepare for things like unexpected hazards, adjusting your speed depending on the zones, and of course the most important thing, honking your horn to warn animals to stay away from the line, something near and dear to my heart. Now, doing all this isn't inherently difficult. In fact, most of the game is just leisurely enjoying the sights and sounds as you move along the track, but this series, and in particular this first entry, are very strict when it comes to timing, and most importantly, stopping to pick up your passengers. Each stop has an exact line that it wants you to stop on, and for every centimeter you're off, it penalizes you. And also if you happen to be early or late, it also penalizes you. And then if you mess up on any of the hazards and speed limits along the way, guess what? It also penalizes you. And if you run out of time, well, that's bad. But it does give you some extra time for honking at animals and rail workers, and that's good. It's a very, very tough game, but in saying that, when stuff goes right for you in this game, and you do manage to make it to a stop on time and get your speed and braking just right, damn, does it feel good. Now luckily, this is a game you can play just fine on a standard PlayStation controller, but to get the most out of it, you will want to pick up one of the Densha de Go controllers, which not only come in standard pad form and one-hander form, but most commonly you'll see this version here, which of course I had to pick up for the video. It's quite straightforward. It's got a lever for your brake and a lever for your accelerate, and outside of a button for your emergency brake and horn, that's pretty much all you'll need really. There's also a spot to put your pocket watch in, a must-have for train drivers in Japan, which you can also acquire Densha de Go versions of, which is pretty cool. Sadly, I do not have any of these, nor do I have a train driver uniform, which, let's be fair, would really elevate playing this thing to the next level, but the controller is good enough, I guess. Honestly, once I got into this thing and figured out its quirks, this is a game that's really hard to put down. It's equal parts relaxing and also incredibly tense, which may sound a bit strange, but the heightened jump from tranquility to a complete panic really did work for me. That, and I also just think trains are pretty cool, and the game also has a cute mascot character, so, you know, what's not to love? Now, while this original version here is still a lot of fun, its rather unforgiving difficulty and the small number of routes does make this a tough one to begin with.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
However, I did find cutting my teeth here and learning the basics in this entry set me up nicely for the next few games in the series, so maybe that'll work well for you too. Either way, once you learn the ropes, it's easy to see why this series was such a huge hit straight out the gate, and with a country that loves trains as much as Japan, who could blame them? As mentioned, there will be plenty more train action in the future, but for now, let's say goodbye to 97 and move on to the debut game from 1998 and the return of giant space fish, and also the letter G, and in this case, the G stands for giant lasers. Hell yeah, it's G-Darius, the follow-up to Darius Gaiden. First released in arcades in 97 and then ported to the PlayStation in early 98, this would be the final Darius game to make it onto the console, and boy, is it a trip. This is yet another game built on the FX1B arcade hardware, the same used for RayStorm, and in many ways G-Darius here is like the Darius version of RayStorm, which is to say it features the classic gameplay and trippy fish battles you know and love, but now with fancy 3D polygons and almost everything else turned up to 11. The major additions to the gameplay here are the addition of branching paths within the already existing branching paths, meaning you can choose from 2 different routes mid-level, which will lead you to different variants of the same boss, which is pretty cool. But the biggest and best addition in this entry is the capture ball system, which replaces the seizure bombs from the last game. The way the capture balls work is that you can fire these out, and if they strike an enemy, you then take control of the enemy and it'll fight alongside you. And while Darius Gaiden had a stripped back version of this exclusive to some mid-bosses, in this game you can capture literally any enemy outside of the big bosses and gain access to a whole new range of attacks, and usually the bigger the enemy, the better the attacks. Now this is pretty fun, but even better, you can sacrifice these creatures once you have them to use something called the Alpha Beam, which is a big chargeable laser that does massive damage, which is pretty cool all by itself. But in one of my favorite mechanics in any shoot 'em up, the bosses in these games also have their own versions of these attacks called beta beams. And if you time your alpha beam at the right time to clash with a boss's beta beam, you have this big back and forth battle where you can kill a boss outright in a single hit. And this right here is the coolest shit ever. I mean, on its own, this game is pretty incredible as it is. I mean, we've already seen how good these games could get with Darius Gaiden, but here in G-Darius, everything is just turned up an extra notch. The visuals are trippy, the bosses are crazy, the music is pure Darius and Zuntata strangeness. It's pretty much everything you could want from an early 3D take on a Darius game, and between this and RayStorm, I think Taito had cemented itself as the premier shoot-'em-up maker on the console during this period, at least in the West anyway. Sure, we would get nice once-offs from other companies like Squaresoft's Einhander, Namco's Xevious 3DG, and later games like Thunder Force 5 and R-Type Delta, but if you were looking for high-quality next-gen shmups, nobody was providing on the PlayStation, quite like Taito. Now that being said, G-Darius does have some weird quirks. Parts of the game seem to lack background music for extended periods of time, which I always found a bit odd. And there is a lot more slowdown in this game compared to, say, RayStorm, but it's nowhere near enough to detract from the overall experience. And look, when you're bad at these games, slowdown is really just a blessing in disguise, if you think about it. Also, they added a boss rush mode, and that's always fun. Now, sadly, this would be the last Darius game for quite some time until the 2009 PSP release, Darius Burst, which itself spun off into a whole host of other Darius Burst games, and is maybe the most complicated naming scheme seen in any series outside of Kingdom Hearts. But luckily, if you want to play G-Darius or a lot of the Darius games, it's seen a whole bunch of ports to collections like Taito Legends on the PS2, which has ports of G-Darius, Darius Gaiden, and RayStorm, amongst lots of other great games. I mean, it even has Elevator Action Returns. Come on now, that's some good shit. And there's even recent HD ports of a lot of these games from M2. The PS4 and Switch versions even have physical releases. And look, if you like cool shoot-em-ups or just firing giant lasers at fish, I really can't recommend this series enough. And luckily, even though this is the final Darius game we'll see in this video, Taito still has one more banger shoot-em-up in store for us, but we're gonna have to wait a little while for that, because it's puzzle time, bitch. Well, here it is, the fourth and final Puzzle Bobble game to appear on the PlayStation, conveniently titled Puzzle Bobble 4 or Bust a Move 4, depending on where you live. This one also got a release on the Dreamcast, which is the version I'm most used to, but both the PlayStation and Dreamcast versions are more or less identical, unless you like slightly shinier bubbles, in which case the Dreamcast version is the way to go. This entry is once again full of the match 3 bubble shooting cute dragon action as you'd expect, but with even more new features and content to help flesh out the package. The big changes to the core gameplay in this entry are the addition of pulleys, which, believe it or not, act like pulleys, raising or lowering depending on the number of bubbles that are attached to each side, really mixing things up in the puzzle stages especially. The other big addition in this version are chain combos, which help you clear the playfield much faster and also look and sound pretty cool, making the versus battles a lot more explosive and also liable to end pretty quickly if things go your way, or if you just suck, which once again, I very much do. As for the modes, well, all the usual puzzle and versus modes reappear alongside the edit mode introduced in 3DX, but this game also has a fun story puzzle mode that sees you going around collecting tarot cards on a very nice map featuring some lovely 2D visuals, and also a challenge mode that sees you ranking up as you complete a series of, well, challenges. It is in the name after all. Although the mode I usually spend the most time in this version is Win Contest, which is kind of like a survival mode that sees you completing as many quick battles as you can in a row without losing. Now this is also the mode where you can unlock most of the game's secret characters, of which there are quite a few. In fact, what this game lacks in Taito cameo characters, something seen a lot of in the last game, it more than makes up for with, well, Bubble Bobble buddies. And it has a little baby in a frog costume that says Goobaloo a whole bunch. And as we know by now, a Taito game of frogs. We love to see it. Overall, this is easily the most feature-rich Puzzle Bobble game on the console, and also what I would consider my personal favorite, simply because the chain combo system is really satisfying. However, depending on who you ask, any of the games we've looked at today in this series could be your favorite, depending on how simple you like your Puzzle Bobble gameplay. I know people who swear by 1, 2, 3, 4, or well, any of them out there. It just depends on what you like yourself. But either way, as long as it's Puzzle Bobble, you can't really go wrong. As for the series' legacy, well, you've no doubt seen one of its many clones over the years, but as for the real deal, luckily the series continues to get new entries every now and then, with the most recent entry being 2023's Switch exclusive Puzzle Bobble Every Bubble, being a really good entry in the series packed to the brim with cute dragon bubble action. So whether it's classic or modern Puzzle Bobble, as long as it's got Bub or Bob, you're in safe hands. Or the Psychic Force gang in there. Weird liminal spaces, they're pretty cool too. Next up, we have Puchi Carat, a port of the 1997 arcade original and the first of a duo of games we'll be looking at that are not only PAL exclusive titles in the West, but also follow an interesting trend, that being Taito making a puzzle game that also features the gameplay of one of its other popular series. And in the case of Puchi Carat, we basically have the puzzle variant of Arkanoid, but also with the visual stylings of Puli-Rula. And I know that sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? And you know what? You'd be right. A beautiful pastel colored game full of personality and polish. Puchi Carat is kind of a hidden gem in the Taito puzzle library, which is convenient considering its name and all the gems present in this thing. A lot of the modes here in this game are what you'd expect from a Taito puzzle game at this point. We have your standard single player trial mode and also a versus mode for competitive gameplay versus a CPU or human opponent. But instead of simply dropping gems from above or aiming them from below, a little dragon companion, you need to use your sick paddle ball skills to direct a ball which upon striking a gem makes it disappear. And if you manage to strike numerous of the same colored gems in a row or even delete a bunch of gems that are above other gems, it can net you big points and combos. And look, while I've played a bunch of Arkanoid style games in the past, most of the time my only thought is, well, you know, don't let the ball fall past the paddle. Everything that happens in between is kind of just a happy coincidence or a happy accident, depending on how you want to look at it. In this game, however, you really need to think about where you are hitting this ball, how you want to aim it, and what the best course of action is if you want to clear a stage or delete a small child spinning a wrench. I mean, look at this guy go. In other words, this low-key might be the toughest breakout style game I've ever played, since it really does require a lot of skill from the player and also some puzzle game mastery. And as we've learned by now, I am suffering from a perpetual skill issue in both. However, the visual stylings and presentation on offer in this thing is some of the nicest seen in any Taito game so far. It's an incredibly pretty and charming game. I just love the way the characters interact behind the game field. And while I'm a big fan of this feature personally, I also appreciate that it might be distracting for some players, so luckily it is a feature that you can turn off if you like. It even has a story mode with some anime cutscenes which look really nice, and also the soundtrack in this thing, low-key one of my favorites from any of the games featured in this video. It has some really catchy feel-good bops. So yeah, needless to say, if you like breakout clones with good vibes and also difficult gameplay, Puchi Carat is a must play. Luckily, this PS1 version is pretty great, but you can also find a port of the game on Taito Legends 2, which every time I bring it up continues to prove its incredible value. And there's also a cute little Game Boy Color port too, a console known for having cute little ports. But as I said, this is just but one of two Taito puzzle hybrid PAL exclusive things to make it to the console. And luckily for me and the flow of this video, the other one is coming up right now. That's right, it's Poppin' Pop, a port of the '98 arcade original and also the final Taito game to make it to the PlayStation in the year '98. There really wasn't that many, was there? This time around, we have yet another puzzle game, but with Space Invaders style gameplay, which I'm happy to say I am much better at than Arkanoid. Also, this game features a bunch of guest characters from other Taito franchises. We of course know the Bobble cuties, but making their PlayStation debut are also the New Zealand story cuties, and the also less cute gang of humans from Doko Doko Don and Kiki Kai Kai, a game that probably shares its name with a drag queen somewhere. The gameplay here is the much more traditional match 3 styling seen in the likes of Puzzle Bobble, where chain reactions and dropping balloons is the name of the game. Only now you control your little guy at the bottom of the screen by moving him left and right, and can rotate your selection of 2 colored balloons to fire at the balloons on the stage above you. It's pretty easy to pick up and play, and if you like Space Invaders gameplay, it's also a lot of fun, would you believe? Once again, we've got the usual variety of modes. We've got your single player story mode with the old branching paths we know and love, and also a 1v1 competitive mode, which really does feel like a natural hybrid of Puzzle Bobble and that Space Invaders battle mode. There's also other stuff like a challenge mode and an easy family mode to let you get some practice in. Honestly, on a gameplay level, I really enjoyed this game quite a bit. Now that's mostly because my ability at puzzle games is quite low, but I sure do like shooting stuff, so at the very least I felt a bit more confident playing this thing, and it also helps me keep up the pretenses that I know what I'm doing in these videos. However, I will say the presentation and audio feels like a step down in this title from what we've seen in Puchi Carat and some of the more recent Puzzle Bobble titles. The 2D sprites are fantastic and cute as ever, but some of the stage backgrounds and UI elements feel and look just a little bland, I guess you could say. It's probably just another one of those cases where going from a really good looking game makes things look a little bit worse if it's not up to the standards of that one, but it is what it is, and same goes for the audio too, which is polished and competent, but just not really as memorable when compared to some of the games that we've looked at previously. That being said, my complaints here are really just a bit nitpicky, as the important part, you know, the gameplay, still shines through and makes for a fun and addicting little game. As for the ports, this similarly appeared on Taito Legends 2 and the Game Boy Color, but with some odd quirks, the first of which being that it's exclusive to the Xbox and Windows version of Taito Legends 2, and also the Game Boy Color version did actually see a release in North America this time, only with a Yogi Bear reskin, now titled Yogi Bear Great Balloon Blast. So that's kind of weird, but good news for Yogi Bear fans, I guess, unless you're a Yogi Bear fan with globophobia, the fear of popping balloons, by the way, which if you happen to suffer from, I do apologize for this entire segment. That really must have sucked for you. But if you're one of those people with a balloon popping fetish, you're welcome, I guess. I googled what they're called, which is a lunar apparently. That means there's officially somebody out there who's a lunar gooner. Anyway, back to trains. Say hello to Densha de Go 2, a port of the '98 arcade original and our first PlayStation game of 1999. Unsurprisingly, this is more of the same arcade train action as you'd come to expect, only this time we have even more routes, even more trains, and a whole bunch of new graphical and performance increases, and even some new weather effects, which not only make this a much prettier and impressive port of the arcade original, but the game has also been balanced a bit better for home use, making it also a much more pleasant experience too. One of the big new features in this follow-up is the inclusion of the Shinkansen, or bullet trains as they're known in English. While the operation of these trains is pretty much the same as the others, the higher speeds and braking distance do change up the gameplay somewhat, and you do really need to learn the quirks of each individual train to really master this thing, although I do appreciate the ever so slight UI changes for the different trains. It is a nice touch. Honestly, by the time I had finished up with the first game, I was already kind of locked in and sold on this series as a whole. I always knew I would enjoy these games since I've been a fan of other sim-style games in the past, be they flight sims, truck simulators, bus simulators, you name it. But something about the low-poly versions of these real-life train lines combined with the charming 2D visuals for the passenger and mascot, the sound effects, and also the legitimately quite challenging gameplay, well, it's hard not to see why this series went on to be so popular in Japan. I'm sure all the cool peripherals, arcade cabs, and also Japan's extreme love for trains contributes heavily, but when it's this fun and this pretty, you I really can't blame them. Now, while the original Densha de Go was the version that was ported to the Sega Saturn and WonderSwan back in the day, number 2 here probably seen the most ports to other platforms during this era, seeing ports to the Dreamcast, WonderSwan, Game Boy Color, and Neo Geo Pocket Color, all of which are quite impressive in their own right. And I'd imagine it's probably quite novel playing a portable version of this game while traveling on the very same train line that you're also driving in-game. I bet a lot of people did that. However, the most notable of these ports is the N64 version of Densha 2, which not only has its own controller peripheral, as to be expected, but this version also utilizes the N64 voice mic, which allows you to earn extra time by calling out the names of stations in the lead up to arrival, which is a really fun and charming little gimmick, and also more importantly, the N64 version is one of the very few Densha de Go titles to have a full English translation patch, and while I do think the series is pretty easy to pick up and learn even if you're Japanese challenged like myself, this translated N64 version is without a doubt one of the best places to learn the ropes. Either way, Densha de Go 2 on the PS1, a great port of a great game, and you love to see it. So people who are familiar with this series of videos know that I like to include weird Western titles that got published in Japan by the company that we're talking about, you know, just for funsies. Well, Taito 2 were responsible for bringing a small number of unusual Western games to Japan. Well, 2 to be exact, and here's the first. It's RC Stunt Copter from Shiny Entertainment, first released in the West in August of '99, before making it to Japan in November of the year 2000. Now, Taito's porting efforts for Japan were pretty light, which is to say that they put the Taito logo on the box, and that's about it. The Japanese versions of these games are otherwise identical to the North American releases, and that also means there's no Japanese text or dialogue whatsoever. Quite convenient for me, probably not so convenient for the Japanese market, but yeah, you know.
What you gonna do?
As for the game, RC Stunt Copter is a pretty interesting beast. As mentioned, it comes from Shiny Entertainment, a company run by one Dave Perry, known for Earthworm Jim, MDK, and Wild 9, amongst others. Well, Dave here was also quite fond of the owl RC helicopter and wanted to make a game that let people experience the joys of the hobby without the massive expense and also the danger of constantly crashing these things. And you know what? They did a pretty good job. This game is entirely designed around the PlayStation's dual analog sticks, mimicking the control of an actual RC helicopter, and once you get it and learn the basics, you quickly understand why this might be a very expensive and difficult hobby, and also why I have no desire to ever get in a full-size helicopter. The game is split into a series of different minigames and challenges that test your various flying skills, from landing to control, maneuverability, aiming, and well, a whole host of different things. Once you get this stuff down, you can also mess about in a stunt arena and pull off some cool tricks for points, which are actually really satisfying to do, not only because they look pretty cool, but once again because this shit is really tough. It's a pretty basic game on the surface, but thanks to the care and effort put into replicating the flight model and also the variety of different copters available, ranging from beginner to advanced options, this is honestly a very cool and unique game on the PlayStation. And I say that knowing that there are other RC copter games on the platform too, because of course there is, but I've always heard over the years this one is the top dog, and I can certainly see why. Also, because this is a Shiny game, it's also a little quirky and weird, in particular the announcer in this game, who you're gonna either love or hate, but I thought he was pretty fun.
The balloon's over to your right. Try to steer without using the rudder. Go easy, you're cranking the control. Ron's never woohoo! Well, it isn't that great, I'm just trying to make you feel better.
As for the reason Taito decided to bring this over to Japan, well, between Densha de Go and some other games you'll see down the line, Taito kinda made sim games on console one of their niches, so a legit RC copter sim, you know, why the hell not? So whether it's this Western version or the Japanese Taito version, which is still once again the Western version, if you like RC copters, this is the game for you. Next up, we have an interesting Japan-only obscurity and also the only role-playing game in today's list. It's Chou Hatsumei Boy Kanipan Hirameki Wonderland, which made it to the PlayStation in September of '99. So a little backstory, Hatsumei Boy Kanipan, or Inventor Boy Kanipan in English, was an anime television series that was first broadcast in 1998. It was about kids building robots mostly, and was heavily inspired by the 1994 Super Famicom RPG Slapstick, or as most of you may know it, RoboTrek, a cool little robot role-playing game and a fan favorite on the Super Nintendo. Well, this anime was also sponsored by Sega, of all people, and not long after it aired, the Dreamcast would also be blessed with a video game tie-in from Sega called Chou Hatsumei Boy Buso Roboto no Nazo, which honestly, depending on where you're researching, is either developed by Sega or by Quintet, who are also the developers of RoboTrek, by the way. Although almost all the research I've done seems to point to Sega being mostly responsible for this thing, which makes the next part even weirder, because roughly a year later, Taito would be responsible for bringing this game over to the PlayStation, meaning we kind of have a Sega game on the PlayStation. Well, It's either a Sega or Quintet game, but whatever it is, it's a cute robot role-playing game about inventing stuff, and that's pretty cool. Now naturally, as this is a Japan-only role-playing game, and a pretty obscure one at that, there are no English translations, guides, or even footage on YouTube that seems to go past the first few minutes of this game. Now luckily I did manage to overcome the first few minutes of the game, mostly thanks to Google Lens. However, even that did not help me get very far, but at the very least I got far enough to be able to understand the basic concept of the game. Essentially, you play as a little inventor and you need to continue inventing new stuff to rank up and earn new licenses, and after your lab gets raided by some bad guys, you need to set out on an adventure alongside your little robot buddy to help find and rescue this scientist guy. Now the main draw of this game is the robot building system, which allows you to invent new parts, build your own little robot battle squad, and then engage in battle using said robots. Now unfortunately, I only really got a taste of the battles, which seem to be fought in real time with your robot abilities being tied to the equipment that you give them. I'm sure there's a lot more depth to it as you move further into the game, but at least on the surface, it does seem like it would make for a fun little battle system. Sadly, I eventually got stuck after I needed to find a key card outside of this building, which for the life of me, I could not find. So my playthrough ended here after about 40 minutes in, but I can certainly see the promise. Now, as for the differences between the Dreamcast and PlayStation versions of this game, luckily most of the game is 2D, so the core of the gameplay is quite similar, with the Dreamcast version benefiting from some additional anime cutscenes and also some voice acting. However, the PlayStation version also supposedly has a bunch of additional content and new parts added in, meaning that it's also the more content-rich of the two versions, so each of them have their perks, but either way, if you struggle with Japanese, this is one of the tougher games I've had getting into, even if you're willing to do a bit of translating using a phone. Still though, an interesting little curio, and one that I'm sure a lot of people might be interested in trying, all the same. I mean, it's a cute robot RPG, and that's good enough for most people, right? Here's another of the Western titles that Taito brought over to Japan, although not one of the weird ones because it's a Space Invaders game, of all things. It's Space Invaders from developers Z-Axis and publisher Activision, although most people just refer to this as Space Invaders 99 or Space Invaders USA, or as Taito renamed it when they brought it to Japan in early 2000, Space Invaders X, which is my personal favorite title for the game. So back in the late 90s and early 90s, there was a trend of revitalizing classic arcade hits with modern polygonal updates, most of which ended up on the PS1. There was a weird Centipede game, a pretty cool Pong game, Missile Command, that rough Galaga shooter, amongst many others. But today we'll be focusing on Space Invaders, back with a brand new gritty look, and also a gruff Space Marine CGI opening to let you know that this shit was made in America. Now, it's probably pretty easy to assume just from the visuals alone that this is kind of bad. I mean, while I don't dislike the visual and aesthetic choices used here, it does kind of lack the visual charm of, well, every Taito-made Space Invaders game, right? I just can't imagine a Space Invaders game without the little alien buddies. It feels a bit weird. However, I'm happy to say on the gameplay front, this is a very enjoyable version of Space Invaders that not only nails the series gameplay, but adds some fun new features and gimmicks to make it feel like a fresh take on a classic. The game sees you traveling from different planets where you'll tackle a series of 10 waves, each culminating with a boss fight at the end, before you move on to a new planet and do it all over again. Now, while the gameplay at its core is the standard Space Invaders we all know and love, what makes this one interesting is the special weapon system tied to the color of your enemies. If you manage to kill 4 enemies of the same color in a row, you get access to a special weapon based on that color. Missiles, lasers, diagonal shots, horizontal and vertical. There is quite a lot actually, and as you move through the planets, new enemy types and colors appear, allowing you to mix up your strategy, and on top of that, the bosses are also quite a lot of fun to fight, feeling more like a traditional shoot-'em-up boss fight rather than simple aliens that move back and forth across the screen at increasing speeds, and they get pretty inventive as the game goes on. Simply put, it's quite literally a modern take on a classic that sticks to its roots, but offers enough new and interesting things to make it stand out in the Space Invaders crowd, and honestly, even despite its somewhat uninspired visual style, it's a really fun game and a must own for any Space Invaders fan in my opinion. Also, the soundtrack can go pretty hard on occasion, and you know we love that. So yeah, that's the end of Space Invaders on the PlayStation. We got one cool Taito developed throwback and one American made revitalization of the classic, both of which are thankfully very good, although maybe a little safe in the grand scheme of things. But hey, nothing wrong with that. It's not like we can expect the Space Invaders guy to start a family and then have them get kidnapped like Pac-Man now, can we? Naturally, Space Invaders is a series that is too important to both Taito and video games as a whole to ever truly go away, and luckily it continued to see plenty of new entries over the years, like that one game where aliens run you over in cars, and once again my personal favorite in the series, the extreme games, which really do slap so fucking hard. Either way, shoutouts to Space Invaders, truly one of the all-time greats, and don't you ever forget it. Next, we have the final Psychic Force title to make it to the PlayStation, and it's Psychic Force 2, a game that made it to Japan in 1999 and later to the West as a PAL exclusive in early 2000. Now, previously when looking at that Psychic Force fan disc, we seen a teaser trailer for Psychic Force 2, which at the time held the subtitle of Psychic Force 2012. Well, as it would turn out, the game, when released in arcades, would straight up just be called Psychic Force 2012 instead of 2. Now, by the time the game was ready to launch in '98, arcade hardware and visuals had come a long way, so this game forgoes the old Taito FX board in favor of the new Taito Wolf system hardware, giving us a much faster and better looking game, seemingly too good for the PlayStation in fact, as 2012 would skip out on the console, instead becoming one of the earliest games to launch on the brand new Sega Dreamcast. And damn, Psychic Force has never looked better, with smoother, higher res graphics and notably 60 FPS gameplay. Psychic Force 2012 was pretty much exactly what you'd want in a next gen upgrade, more Psychic Force, but with expanded gameplay, new characters and a sick visual upgrade. That being said though, in terms of content, Psychic Force 2012 on the Dreamcast was still about on par with what we've seen in the original Psychic Force, something it got a bit of flack for back in the day, especially when compared to the likes of Tekken 3 on the PlayStation and Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast. It's very content-rich console contemporaries at the time. However, a little while later in '99, Psychic Force 2012 would in fact find its way onto the PlayStation, now under the title of Psychic Force 2, I suppose to keep things consistent on the platform. And it's not just the name that's changed. Psychic Force 2 is a very interesting port because it's both a downgrade and an upgrade in a lot of ways. The downgrade, of course, being the reduction in visual quality and the gameplay reverting from 60 FPS to 30 FPS, keeping it on par with the original Psychic Force on PS1, or 25 FPS if you're playing the PAL version, which is, you know, pleasant. But where this port comes into its own is its wealth of additional content, that being in the form of 3 additional characters returning from the original Psychic Force, a bunch of extra modes like survival and group battle mode, pocket station support, well, at least in the Japanese release, and the real star of the show, the Psy Expand mode, which lets you select a character, level them up to learn new abilities, and even give them the abilities of other characters too, making for a really great wealth of content for Psychic Force fans to dig into. Like, in general, the Dreamcast port of the game is the preferred competitive version nowadays thanks to its frame rate and the ability to play it quite easily online via Fightcast, but even despite the visual and frame rate downgrade, this is by far the most content-rich version of the game out there, and a fantastic PS1 fighting game in its own right. Like, taken on its own merits, this, in my opinion, is one of the best fighting games on the PlayStation, with a great cast of characters, legit impressive visual and stage design, fantastic gameplay that's easy to pick up and hard to master, as well as a banging soundtrack with both arcade and arranged versions included on the disc. I mean, at this stage you should know Zuntata always delivers the goods, and in Psychic Force 2, those goods are certainly delivered.
Ready, go!
そろそろ終わりにしましょう。
Ready, go! 時を
And as always, the PlayStation version has an exclusive anime opening. And look, let's be fair, if the puzzle game managed to get one, it would be weird not to have one here too, so it's great to see. So yeah, all in all, it's one of those rare cases where if you're a Psychic Force fan, there's legit good reason to own both the Dreamcast and PlayStation ports of this game, and own them both, I do, because making this video has turned me into a massive Psychic Force fan now. What can I say? I just love firing lasers at people to cool music. I'm a simple guy. Now this would sadly be the last game in the series to appear as of this date. However, Psychic Force would receive a nice collection on the PS2, which includes ports of the first game and 2012, alongside a revision of 2012 exclusive to this collection called 2012 EX. Now supposedly there's some sound issues in this version, as is the case with a lot of PS2 ports it would seem, but they did make a whole bunch of editions that came with collectible figures in the box, so I'm pretty happy with it. Also, there's a bunch of games worth mentioning that are very Psychic Force coded in the gameplay department. There's 98's Astra Superstars from Sunsoft, which is a fun sprite-based game in this style and is absolutely insane. There's Koei's The Strega on the PS1, which is basically Psychic Force in a 3D arena setting and is also very good. There's also the Senko no Ronde games from G-Rev, a company actually made up of ex-Taito developers that strays even further into the realm of a shoot-'em-up fighting game hybrid and is also very good. And there's also this other game on the PS1 called Evil Zone, which I've yet to play, but I always hear it mentioned alongside Psychic Force as a cool fighting game for the freaks out there. So I assume if you like Psychic Force, you'll probably like Evil Zone too. So that's it for Psychic Force on the PlayStation, right? Well, yes, and also no. You'll see what I mean towards the end of the video, but let's forget about that for now and focus on the real important things in life, like high-speed rail transportation. Say hello to Densha de Go Professional, which made it to the PlayStation in early December '99, of course, exclusive to Japan. And unlike the previous two Densha games, which were ports of arcade titles, Professional is the first Densha game to be made specifically with home console play in mind, which is nice for a couple of reasons, mostly that it's by far the easiest of the Densha games we played thus far. Now that still doesn't mean it's easy, but the game design isn't based around siphoning coins from your pocket, so that's a nice little boost. As for the content, this version contains a lot of the routes and trains seen in the first and second entry, so you can kind of consider it like a greatest hits mixture of the two, and on top of that, there's some new lines here that are part of the Kanto and Tokaido lines as well. Now, I'm not exactly the best person to ask when it comes to Japanese rail routes, but that does sound pretty good to me. On top of that, the game maintains the nice visual and frame rate improvements seen in the second entry, but also adds this little rail map on the left-hand side of the screen that gives you a heads up about traffic lights and speed limits, something that you kind of had to memorize in previous entries, which was a big part of why the games could be so difficult. Now, there are some levels that lack this map, like the nighttime routes, but even still, trains have these little light indicators to help you with speed limits, so it's more or less the same. Now, these features are probably the single biggest addition that balances the difficulty for home play, and overall I found that it just makes the game a whole lot more pleasant to play, especially if you're very bad like me. Honestly, between the wealth of content on this disc and the new balances to the gameplay, I would say this is easily the best of the Densha packages we've looked at so far, not only for experts, but for first-timers too. The only issue really is that this disc is probably a little pricier than the more common Densha 1 and 2. However, if you were just to have one of the PS1 Densha games in your collection, I'd say this is the one to get. Although that being said, we still have 2 more Densha games to go, and also some other Daigo games to look at as well. That was a very difficult sentence to read, and I very much regret writing it. Anyway, back to puzzle games. Our final game of 99, and also one of the most unique puzzle games on this list, is Landmaker, aka Builder's Block in North America, a game with a whole bunch of interesting cover art depending on where you buy it, and somehow almost all of these are accurate. Landmaker is an interesting game for a couple of reasons. One is that it features a port of the 1998 arcade game Landmaker, a 2D puzzle game about building structures and land out of puzzle pieces, which is pretty cool, but also this PS1 version features a bunch of additional content that plays the same as the arcade release, but features a brand new 3D visual style and somewhat ominous aesthetic. It's a little odd, but as for the game itself, it's a lot of fun. Now, we might as well start with the arcade port, a game that features maybe the most unique visual style, cast of characters, and gameplay of all the Taito puzzlers that we've looked at so far. I don't know, there's just an air of classiness to this game. It features beautiful artwork and a lovely watercolor style, and as much as I love a cute dinosaur from time to time, this just feels a little more grown up, I guess you could say, and I really do appreciate the change. As for the gameplay, this once again sees you controlling a little thing at the bottom of the screen, moving left and right and firing stuff upwards. However, this game has a very heavy focus on diagonals, which are colored game pieces ricocheting off other pieces and sliding upwards into place. And the goal here is to really make a square out of the same colored pieces, which in turn will make a little building appear. But the bigger the squares, the bigger the buildings. And once you're ready to complete your square, you can shoot another matching piece into the glowing point at the bottom to cash in. It's a little unusual for a match-style puzzle game, but you'll get used to it pretty quickly, and once you do, you'll find this game is a lot of fun. I don't know, I think I just have a thing for games where you build little civilizations in unconventional ways. I mean, between this and the game Egg, where you roll an egg around to build civilizations, I think Japan were really onto something here. See, if Dizzy Egg and Chucky Egg were all about building civilizations, maybe I'd be more into them. Also, the music here in Landmaker is incredible, but you know, it is Zuntata, so that's a given. Now, the thing with the arcade game is that it only features this 1v1 competitive gameplay type, which, to be fair, is the main draw of the game for me, but it does lack a single-player puzzle-style mode, similar to the other Taito puzzle games that we've seen thus far. Hold up though, back at the menu you see there has been a new puzzle and battle mode added especially for the PS1 release. However, the visual style has completely changed. Now, the gameplay is still the exact same, mind you, so it's, you know, a Landmaker puzzle mode, that's for sure, now just with significantly less appealing visuals in my opinion. Now, to be fair, the modes here are still a lot of fun, and I understand how much trickier it would be to add all these modes alongside the 2D animations versus, you know, just packaging it into a grey aesthetic-y void, but given the choice, I would have preferred more of the sick 2D stuff, but, you know, the gameplay still holds up, and that's the main thing. So yeah, on the whole, this is probably the most interesting and unique of all the Taito puzzle games on the console, and one that I'm definitely going to put a lot more time into, I think. It really is a lot of fun. And speaking of a lot of fun, Our first game of the new millennium is also one of our strangest. It's Chaos Break, a survival horror title exclusive to Japan and PAL regions, and maybe the least serious survival horror game on the PlayStation, and that's really saying something. So, a little backstory, Chaos Break is actually a spin-off of a '98 arcade title called Chaos Heat, one of the first games to utilize Taito's newest and final iteration of the Sony ZN2 arcade board, known as the G-Net, which was more or less an overclocked PlayStation, and seen a lot of cool games not only from Taito, but from other developers as well. Games like S.W.A.R.M, and even some cool Takumi games like Otenki Kurorin Weather Tales and Night Raid all ran on the G-Net board, and those last two also received PS1 ports as well, although since neither were published or developed by Taito, they won't be appearing in this list, but they are cool though, and you should try them. Anyway, back to Chaos Heat. This right here, maybe one of my all-time favorite Taito games. It's essentially a hybrid of Sega's Dynamite Cop and something like Shock Troopers on the Neo Geo, but with a horror theme. It's one of the most insane games I've ever played, like pure stupid arcade bliss, from the visuals to the sounds to the gameplay. It's just peak the whole way through, and sadly this game has never been ported anywhere as far as I can tell. I mean, it's got a German ninja with a flamethrower. What more could you want? Now, presumably, seeing as this game ran on the G-Net and in theory could have been ported to the PlayStation with maybe a few visual downgrades, that was the plan initially. However, as we've touched on in past videos, these very arcadey style action games weren't exactly flying off the shelves back in '98, but I'll tell you what was flying off the shelves though. Capcom's Resident Evil, and to a lesser extent, Konami's Silent Hill. So Taito, instead of porting Chaos Heat to the PlayStation, thought to themselves, hold on, what if we rework this game into an actual survival horror title featuring the same characters and locations, only minus the German flamethrower ninja sadly, because he's a little too weird. Well, we get Chaos Break, episode from Chaos Heat, as it says here on the title screen. A survival horror game that also manages to retain some of the arcade silliness of its predecessor. Now this game, right, I reviewed it a long time ago on the channel, mostly because I was really curious about a PAL exclusive survival horror title from Taito that was not only quite obscure, but often called one of the worst games on the console. And my takeaway from the experience was pretty straightforward. The game is an absolute mess. However, it is very funny, and if you think this is one of the worst games on the console, you're an absolute melt. The main issue with Chaos Break is that it straddles the line between survival horror, you know, scares, tension, limited resources, all that good stuff. But also you can like roundhouse kick parasites and giant rats, and you also have big lasers and napalm bombs and all sorts of crazy stuff. It feels like a game that doesn't know what it wants to be, and that's pretty much because it's a really stupid arcade game masquerading as a scary survival horror, and as such it doesn't do either particularly well. It's a rough survival horror game, and it's also not as fun as, say, Chaos Heat, which is a game that knows it's stupid and plays into it. Chaos Break, on the other hand, is really stupid, but doesn't seem to know it. Now that to me still makes this a very funny game, and a fun playthrough if you know what you're getting into, especially thanks to the terrible music and perfect of-the-era survival horror voice acting, which, you know, every PS1 game has gotta have.
But...
And besides, if we don't act now, it'll be too late. I doubt it'll just stay in its tube like a good boy.
Okay.
Overall, it's not a game I'd really recommend if you're looking for a good survival horror experience, but if you're looking for a dumb survival horror experience, the one that lets you do lots of backflips and, you know, kick rats, you're probably still gonna have a fun time with this. Unfortunately, it is a victim of the PAL exclusive horror game tax, which means it's crazy pricey to pick up nowadays. However, there has been a recent patch for this game that bumps the PAL version up to NTSC speed, so if you want to emulate or mister this game, or whatever it is that you do these days, there's never been a better time. I'll leave a link to my full review in the video description if you want to learn more, but if you like a bit of silliness and whimsy in your horror games, do check this out, or more importantly, check out Chaos Heat. Seriously, it's worth struggling through MAME for. It really is that good. Who could have guessed? It's more train time. Launching a little over a month after Professional, we have the next Densha de Go entry on the PlayStation, and that's Densha de Go Nagoya Railroad. And if the name doesn't give it away, this entry primarily focuses on the rail network in Nagoya, featuring not only a whole new collection of routes and trains never before seen in the series, but this one also sees the introduction of monorails and street trams for the very first time, which is Pretty cool. Sadly, you need to unlock the monorail, and as I'm very bad at these games, I have no footage to show you, so please enjoy this brief clip of Homer Simpson driving a monorail to fill in the gaps. As expected, this entry continues with the improvements seen in Professional, namely the balance changes and the addition of a rail map on the left-hand side of the screen, which is as useful as ever. This entry also includes a few additional beginner modes to help you practice your skills, and also the introduction of a free running mode, which lets you drive the trains as fast as you like without the need to worry about punishments or stopping or any stupid things like that. I mean, fuck those passengers, you know what I mean? Of course, the main draw here for rail aficionados are the new routes, sights, sounds, and trains that you can drive. I also like the Nagoya specific gimmick where you have to sound your horn before leaving a station, something I assume they also have to do in Nagoya, or else why else would it be here? Although my personal favorite addition are the street trams, mostly because in Ireland we also have a street tram service called the Lewis, which is notoriously bad, but it did make me feel a little nostalgic driving one around Nagoya while desperately trying to avoid street traffic, something the Lewis is also notoriously very bad at doing. On the whole, this isn't the most content-rich or mandatory edition of Densha de Go, despite being the priciest of the PS1 entries, but if you're looking to expand your collection with some fun new additions and routes not seen in the previous entries, this is another worthwhile entry in a franchise with a lot of worthwhile entries. And speaking of which, we've only one left to go, and it's easily the most unusual of the bunch. But before that, we need to get back to Taito's sim routes, and that means instead of trains, it's planes. That's right, continuing a very Daigo heavy 2000, it's Jet de Go, Let's Go by Airliner, which if you didn't guess by now, is basically Densha de Go, but with planes. This is not only a spin-off of the Train series, but also a spiritual successor to Taito's early arcade sim roots with the Landing series, which was brought up before in the video, but this time it's even more relevant, so why not do it again? Unlike Densha de Go, however, Jet de Go launched exclusively on consoles and PC, being built ground up for the PlayStation, before later seeing a PC port and even a cool Game Boy Color version, so you can live out the dream of flying a plane while flying on a plane. However, despite the lack of an arcade original, Jet de Go still gives us a nice blend of sim and arcade action, aiming to replicate the feel of flying a plane, but without the years of training needed to do so. All you need to do is run through a few quick tutorials, remember where the triangle button is, and pick up a dangerous drinking habit, and you should be good to go. Now this game is split into two different modes. Flight mode, which gives us a more arcade style experience focused primarily on takeoff and landing, you know, the difficult parts of flying a plane, where you get scored based on your path, angle, speed, and doing all the correct takeoff procedures. There's 3 different plane types, which each represent the game's difficulty classes, and believe me, going from beginner in a little prop plane to advanced with its double-decker commercial liners is different, let's just put it that way. And then there's cruise mode, which combines the takeoff and landing with the cruising part of flying a plane. Here you take the role of a rookie Japan airline pilot, where you need to rack up flight miles to increase your rank. And in this mode, most of your time will be spent enjoying the sights, informing passengers of turbulence, and listening to the lovely soundtrack, which unlike Densha, you can listen to while piloting in this one. Well, only while cruising, but still, it's pretty sweet. Now of course, once again this game is well suited to a PS1 DualShock controller, but you can't expect the peripheral masters at Taito to release this game solo. No, of course, it came with a special Jet de Go controller, and I mean, look at this bad boy. This right here is the good stuff. Of course, the actual operation of this thing isn't too dissimilar to the conductor controller seen in Densha de Go. The main difference is of course the yoke, which is not only slang for a miscellaneous thing in Ireland, but also the control part of a plane. This controller has options for your altitude, roll, and there's also toggles for your rudder, flaps, all that good stuff. It's a lovely piece of kit, and no doubt enhances the flying experience a great deal. I mean, sure, the game is fun on a regular controller, but unlike Densha, which I think has enough exciting moment-to-moment gameplay to be pretty fun with or without a novelty controller, a lot of the charm of this game comes down to the simple joy of flying a plane. I mean, there's a lot less hazards and braking and stopping during a commercial flight, and I find the act of flying pretty easy with a basic PlayStation pad, so if you're looking to get a bit more challenge out of this game, I'd say the Jet de Go controller does enhance the experience quite a bit. Overall, this is another really fun game, and despite the language barrier, it's also another one that's relatively easy to play without any Japanese knowledge, although just due to the gameplay differences and how much, I don't know, chiller flying is, I think this one might be a harder sell for some people. The arcadey and video gaming nature of Densha de Go makes it surprisingly addictive for a train sim, while this game here has a lot more downtime and limited variety, since really the main difficulty is just in the takeoff and landing parts of the game, and the environments are, well, just, you know, sky. However, as a chill experience and a console take on a legit flight sim, this game really is quite the vibe. Once again, the production values and attention to detail in this thing are second to none. Just like Densha is a train game for train freaks, this is an airliner game for airliner freaks, and it really does sell you on the whole experience. Plus, the soundtrack in this one really hits the spot for me. I've been listening to this OST even before I tried the game, and I think it's one of Zuntada's best on the console, with some really lovely ambient jungle and D&B, which I know a lot of you will really enjoy. So yeah, that's Jet They Go, a cool once-off on the console and a legitimately different style of flight game on a console with a lot of good flight games. And while not as popular as its train cousin, it did go on to gain a cult following in its own right, and even managed to see a follow-up on the PS2 and PSP, which are also very good, and that we love to see. Although next up, we have the final Densha de Go game on the console, only this one forgoes the Densha in favor of something a little more classic.
We go on burning the fire so that everybody may give up hope.
Say hello to the final Densha de Go title on the console, and this one's a spin-off. That's right, it's Kisha de Go, which made it to the PlayStation in March of the year 2000, and by now you can probably tell the big difference between this game and its predecessors, and that's the type of trains you'll be operating. While the previous games featured electric trains, Kisha de Go is all about steam locomotives, which is certainly a unique twist on the formula. Well, not in the core gameplay department, that's still pretty much the same. Time limits, stopping at stations, obeying the law, all that good stuff. And the controls are also still the same. For as much as I'd love Taito to make a controller that you could shovel coal into, that just doesn't seem practical. However, even with these similarities, driving one of these big boys certainly feels and looks different. The little coal animations, the difficulty in making these big things stop, managing the water pressure and letting off some steam, and probably the biggest difference, this giant train sprite that takes up a chunk of the screen. Kisha is a very unique entry in the series. In fact, I think it's the only one to focus on this style of train, and I think a big reason for that might just be down to how difficult this entry is. I've heard fans of the series call this entry the hardest of any Densha game, and well, you know, I think a lot of that comes down to how much harder it would be to operate one of these things in real life. I mean, the process of shoveling coal alone, I don't think my back or my eyebrows would appreciate that. That being said, you can still certainly see the appeal in this spin-off, and while it's on the lighter side content-wise compared to the more recent entries we've seen, there's still plenty here for any train enthusiast to enjoy, and let's be fair, there's not many games out there that focus primarily on the joy of driving old steam trains, and if there was any series you'd want to see tackle it, it's gotta be this one, right? Anyway, that's it for Densha de Go on the PlayStation, Taito's biggest hit on the console, and not a single entry ever left Japan. A fact that is still true despite the series continuing to see entries even today. Now, I'm sure this isn't down to a lack of desire for the series globally. I mean, I've seen people in Tesco wearing train simulator shirts over here, so I know that's not the case. More so, I'd imagine it's down to the licensing nightmare that would be to get these things out globally, one that would not only be very complicated, but also very expensive for Taito to do, and without the guarantee of a big audience, it's just something that doesn't make a lot of sense financially, sadly. Video games are business at the end of the day. However, as you've seen, there are plenty of games to check out in the series on old and newer platforms, and there's even some cool plug and play units you can get into if you just want to have fun with the controller out of the box. So if you've never tried Densha de Go before and would like to after seeing this video, there's never been a better time, and honestly it's a series I've really grown quite fond of in the process of making this video. All we need now is a Thomas the Tank Engine spin-off, and we're golden. Come on, Taito, give the people what they want, and by people, I mean me. I'm people. here we have another gem in Taito's run on the console, and it's Ray Crisis, the third and final game in the Rays series, originally released in arcades in '98 on the GNet board, before being ported to the PlayStation in April 2000. And let me tell you this right here, Ray Crisis may be the most graphically impressive and high-budget 3D shoot-'em-up to ever grace the console. Like, keep in mind the Gina arcade board was basically a souped-up PlayStation, and despite some downgrades in the visuals and the removal of 2-player support to make it work on the console, it still looks and feels like a game that was built for a souped-up PlayStation, and the fact it runs at a lovely 60 FPS as well, it's really quite something. Ray Crisis is actually a prequel to the first 2 games story-wise, where you play as a computer virus known as a Wave Rider trying to take down an AI supercomputer called Conhuman. Now this all plays out in the form of a shoot-'em-up naturally, and it is absolutely insane, but visually and aesthetically, this thing is like peak Y2K computer coolness. It's like the movie Hackers in shoot-'em-up form, and that alone is reason enough to play this thing, I think, but luckily the gameplay is also pretty damn sweet. It continues the gameplay style seen in RayStorm, but adds a whole bunch of new features, like an additional third ship that has a completely separate scoring system to the other 2, the ability to choose the order of the 4 stages that play out after the opening level, and the main addition to this one gameplay wise, the encroachment meter, which increases for every enemy that manages to escape during battle, and if it ever reaches 100% or higher, you start to lose points, which is obviously very bad. However, if you manage to keep the encroachment meter low enough, it could also change the formation and patterns of enemies and even the routes that you take within stages, giving this game a dizzying amount of options and mechanics to play around with. And that's just the regular mode. This PS1 port also features an arrange mode similar to the extra mode in RayStorm, but in this one, not only do you get the recolored stages and arranged soundtrack, which is excellent, but this one also changes up the gameplay where you always have a max powered ship, and instead of power-ups, you just collect points and extra lives, and are tasked with getting to the end with no continues, making this mode my actual preferred way of playing this game, since you're always crazy powerful, but the risk of failure is always there, and believe me, you probably will fail, as this is also crazy hard like RayStorm, but at least the standard mode has infinite continues, so you can fail without too much pain. Also, I really gotta give a shout out to the music in this one. It's easily the most PlayStation sounding of the Ray games, and even in the shoot 'em up genre, I can't recall any game that has music quite like this one. It's really, really good. As for the version differences, this game was once again brought over to North America by Working Designs. However, unlike the RayStorm port, this one is almost entirely untouched in the gameplay department. The only thing removed is the in-game instructions, which have been replaced with an art gallery, which is fine, really. Also, I should mention the Japanese release also contains a Pocket Station minigame called Pocket Ray, which is pretty damn cool. Supposedly this was kept out of the North American release, but I have heard from people in the past that the North American version does in fact include Pocket Station support, and well, it is here in the menu, so it probably does. I'd imagine if there was ever a company to keep this in, it would be Working Designs, so maybe give it a try yourself. Either way, all versions of this game are pretty great, and I should also mention that there's a Japanese re-release in the Simple series that contains both RayStorm and Ray Crisis on the one disc, complete with all the bonus modes too, so that's definitely worth tracking down if you're so inclined. So yeah, a great ending to a great trilogy of shooters, and honestly when it comes to these games, I could see different people favoring any of these three for one reason or another. You really can't go wrong with any of them. Luckily, these games have also seen modern ports from M2 as part of the Ray's arcade chronology, and you can get them separately too if you like, so they're very easy to buy and play nowadays. But either way, between Darius and the Ray series, Taito are, for my money, the king of shoot-em-ups on the PlayStation, and if you've yet to try any of these things, you owe it to yourself to rectify that as soon as possible, and considering the quality of these games, it makes this next game I'm about to show you a whole lot more depressing. The last and possibly most perplexing of our weird Western inclusions on this list, it's Armorine's Project S.W.A.R.M, a sci-fi first-person shooter from Acclaim that originally launched in the West in May 2000 before being brought to Japan by Taito a little later in the year, and once again without any Japanese language support whatsoever. Now while this may seem like a weird game for Taito to publish, Acclaim did handle a lot of the publishing for Taito games in the West, and since Taito do enjoy the odd game about blowing up aliens, it's maybe not the worst title for them to bring over, at least on paper, because sadly the game itself, probably one of, if not the worst first-person shooters on the console. You see, Armorines was originally an N64 game, made in the Turok 2 engine and developed by Acclaim Studios London, who you might also know by their previous name, Probe Entertainment Software. Well, as I've detailed in past videos, specifically with another Turok engine first-person shooter from Acclaim, S.W.A.R.M, games designed with N64 hardware in mind didn't really port that well over to the PlayStation and almost always ended up being worse than their N64 counterparts. And to be fair, when it came to N64 shooters, Armorines was at best kind of a mid-tier sci-fi shooter. It was competent, it had split-screen co-op, but compared to the likes of Turok or GoldenEye, it was just a little bit bland and forgettable. Well, here on the PlayStation, the game maintains its bland and forgettable status, but it now also looks really bad, and also runs really bad. It still has the split-screen co-op though, so that's pretty nice. The game sees you selecting one of two different Space Marines and moving through some very bland and repetitive levels, just blasting aliens en masse. It's not like criminally bad or anything except for that rail shooter section near the beginning of the game, but it's just so uninspired and by the numbers, especially for a 2000 era shooter, that, and it's also very janky. Now the one thing I will give this game credit for though is that it has a great dual analog control scheme, so at the very least it does play very well. I know a lot of people credit Alien Resurrection for being the game that introduced this control scheme to FPS games on console, but this game predates it, as does South Park on the PS1, which predates Armorines, as does Medal of Honor, which predates South Park, as does Shadow Master, which predates Medal of Honor. Although from my personal experience, I'd say both Medal of Honor and Armorines have the best feeling of the dual analog FPS controls on the console. It's just a shame they're here in an otherwise very bleh shooter. Still though, if you like bland environments, choppy frame rates, and bullet sponge enemies, you might get some fun out of this one, although you'd probably get even more fun out of it on the N64. As for its place in Taito history, it exists, I guess. Anyway, next game. Hey look, a real Taito game, and a real good one too. It's Cosmo Warrior Zero, an arcade-style arena shooter that made it to the PlayStation in May of the year 2000, and one that's based on the universe and characters of Leiji Matsumoto, whose style you're no doubt familiar with if you're into classic anime, or also have just watched those Interstellar Daft Punk videos. Those are pretty great too. Now this is another game I reviewed in the past and had a really good time with. It kind of plays similarly to other third-person arena shooters of the day, think Virtual On, but with space pirates and cartwheels and stuff, and you're kind of on the right track. Now what makes this game really fun is that it not only has the usual 1v1 projectile heavy gameplay that the genre is known for, but it also includes a bunch of story mode campaigns that focus on a bunch of the selectable characters, and these not only include 1v1 fights, but entire levels that you get to play through in this style, alongside some very nice voice story segments as well. A playthrough of this mode with each character is quite short and overall pretty arcadey in style, but personally I think it suits the gameplay well and makes for a really fun little action-packed experience with some really nice visuals and tons of Matsumoto fan service. My only gripes at the time was the odd absence of background music during some of the battles, and also the lack of a two-player versus mode, as this could have been a pretty fun competitive game and we could always use more arena battlers out there, but still as a licensed tie-in game, something that's Actually quite rare from Taito on the console, it sure did get that Taito level of care and polish that you'd come to expect, and it's a real fun time, even if you're not familiar with the source material or can't understand Japanese. It would also later be adapted into a full anime series in 2001, and that's usually a sign something is good. Also, one of my favorite things about this game is how extra and over the top the HUD design in it is. It's probably one of the most ridiculous in any game I've ever seen. I mean, you can tone it down if you like, but come on. Look at this.
Lovely stuff.
As always, I'll leave a link in the description to my full review if you want to learn more. But next up we have another game I've reviewed in the past, and also the final De Go game to appear on the console. Well, here it is, the final game in today's list to feature the De Go branding. It's RC De Go, and unlike RC Stunt Copter, this was in fact made by Taito, and instead of helicopters features cool little RC cars, and also a great little opening featuring RC cars. And we love to see it. Originally released in arcades in '99 on the G-Net board, and then ported to the PS1 globally in the year 2000, this game is one of the more interesting racers on the console in my opinion, because while there are other RC racers out there, notably games like Revolt and RC Revenge, which feature RC cars but still play like a regular old racer, RC De Go instead, in Taito fashion, aims to give us a hybrid of arcade and sim experience, instead putting the player into the perspective of somebody controlling an RC car from a distance, just like you would do in an actual RC car race. And on top of that, the game also cleverly utilizes the analog sticks to replicate the controls of an RC car controller. Well, at least one that looks like this. The arcade version features this style of controller, and of course there is a controller like this for the PlayStation as well, but for the purposes of this video, it's dual analog controls for me, baby. And not only is it very satisfying to play once you get used to it, you can also get a little train shell and use that to smash into other cars. And let me tell you, that's good shit. The game features a whole bunch of different tracks in both on-road and off-road styles, and the core gameplay loop involves you winning races of escalating difficulty, earning prize money, and using that prize money to upgrade your car with stuff you would also upgrade an actual RC car with, letting you compete in tougher, faster races. And believe me, it gets pretty fast and pretty tough. It's still very video gamey in both gameplay and structure, but Taito once again gives us an accessible, arcadey and unique take on the racing formula, while also knowing and paying respect to its source material. Like, I'm not saying Revolt isn't respectful of the hobby or a very fun game in its own right, because it's a banger, let's be fair. But if I was somebody legitimately interested in the hobby of racing these things, this would probably be the game for me. And it also helps that it's just a lot of fun regardless. You see, that's Taito's skill really. They'll make niche games for the freaks out there, but the games are also so goddamn fun that they might inadvertently turn you into a freak too. I mean, don't you want to drive around as a little tank or a bear and ruin other drivers' days? See? That's a great game right there. Next up, we have maybe my favorite game in this entire list, and I'm not even kidding. It's Power Shovel, aka Power Diggers, over in PAL regions, a port of the 1999 arcade release, and the only game on our list to originally run on the rather powerful Taito Type 0 hardware, which is more like a PS2 than a PS1, so that's kind of cool. This game right here is all about the joy of digging holes and also driving heavy machinery and doing silly things with heavy machinery. And I gotta tell you, it's pretty incredible. Now, very early on when I started making videos here on YouTube, I reviewed a pretty similar game called Dirt Jockey Heavy Equipment Operator, and I remember stating in that video, only on the PlayStation could you find a one-of-a-kind game like this. Well, soon after making that video, I learned that the PlayStation is in fact the type of console where one-of-a-kind games often come in pairs, and while Dirt Jockey is essentially a more simulation-focused take on the heavy machine operator experience, Power Shovel is kind of like that, but also with Taito arcade silliness added in, and my god, is it fun. Also, this game launched alongside what is probably the single greatest Taito controller of all time, the Power Shovel controller, and sadly for me, I had already blown my video budget on the train and flight controllers, and after playing this, I wish I'd got the Power Shovel controller instead. Not because the game isn't fun without it, it most certainly is, it's just because, you know, look at this thing. you know you want to try it. So the main gimmick of this game is of course the simulated heavy machine experience, which once again thanks to the DualShock controller is replicated very well via some analog sticks and a few buttons. You'll learn to drive various officially licensed machines, conquer your digging arms, and become a master at moving dirt from one location to another, something that manages to release endorphins in both the male and dog brain. You'll learn this via a bunch of license tests, which are rather tough to master at first, just like driving the real thing, I'd assume. Now, we do actually have a place near me called Diggerland where you can pay to experience this firsthand, and it's even advertised on the PAL box for this game, so you know that's gotta be good. Of course, once you get this down, you can then move on to the meat of the game, which is a mixture of short challenges that both highlight simulation style gameplay, you know, stuff you'd actually expect to be doing in this kind of machinery, and then very silly and fun mini games, which range from knocking down a house piece by piece, smashing up a car, which is as fun as you'd expect, mastering some obstacle courses, making curry because everybody loves curry, and my personal favorite, rescuing turtles from a pool and then putting them into a smaller pool, and they even make cute little noises when you rescue them. See? Now this I love. I gotta tell you, Power Shovel is such a fun little game that is both full of Taito polish and charm, and once again manages to mash up an arcade and simulation style experience into a game that I feel only they could make. You see, that's the joy of Taito. They make games you'd never think you'd enjoy until you try them yourself and you think, oh shit, buying Taito toys with a heavy vehicle? Of course I'd like to do that. How could I not? And even with how overtly silly this game is, it's still also a game for people who legit love heavy vehicles and just digging holes, you know? It just feels authentic. And despite the fact that I'm occasionally using these things to knock down a house, I have come away from this with a deeper respect and understanding of the difficulty of operating these things and also how to make a mean curry. It's a win-win. So if like me you have a thing for operating heavy machinery, digging holes and saving turtles, Power Shovel is a must-try Taito game on the console in my opinion, and if you can get the cool controller, more power to you. I mean, that word literally is in the name, after all. Next up, we have a trio of titles released one after another and all part of the super light 1500 series, and here's the first. Qix 2000, a port of the 1981 arcade original, also including a fancy new arranged version exclusive to this package. Now, we've already mentioned the Simple series a few times in this video, a collection of budget price games from Japanese publisher / developer D3 that retailed in Japan for, you guessed it, 1,500 yen, which was roughly about $10, at least back when these games came out anyway. These collections would include original games meant to retail at a budget price, and also budget releases of full price games, kind of like your greatest hits or platinum releases in the West. And many of these Simple series games would also make it out over to the West, usually courtesy of budget publishers too. Well, there was also another very similar line of games from a company called Success that followed this exact same formula, only without the numbered volumes in the name. And that's the super light 1500 series, which is different, but also mostly the same. And here's one of 4 Taito releases that made it out under that series, Qix 2000. Now, Qix is an interesting game for a few reasons, one of which is that it's one of the very few games that come from Taito of America, and it was created by husband and wife duo Randy and Sandy Pfeiffer, and with names like that, you knew they were meant to be together. The other interesting thing about this game is that it would go on to be one of the most popular styles of erotic game, since the whole premise of this thing is kind of drawing a line, avoiding hazards, and capturing parts of an arena until you eventually capture enough of the arena to complete a level, something that would of course turn out to be quite effective in the world of erotic games, where instead of capturing an arena, you could slowly reveal nude women instead, and as such, Qix's legacy has been secure ever since. Fair play to you, Randy and Sandy. Now, this style of game I really quite like. There's just something very satisfying about drawing these little lines piece by piece, like some sort of extreme etch-a-sketch, while also avoiding all sorts of hazards, and most notably this evil mess of lines ominously moving around the playfield, which is the eponymous Qix. And believe me, this thing will make your life hell. And that's the thing, for as much as I enjoy the gameplay of Qix, it is so goddamn hard. Maybe one of the hardest games I have ever played. I don't know if I suck or just can't predict this thing's movement, but it always messes me up. It is crazy. As for the cool inclusion in the super light releases though, we get a new arranged mode with updated graphics, sound, some new gameplay features like power-ups, and also some background music, which is very nice. Of course, the real benefit here is the inclusion of anime girls that appear on the field to motivate you to complete levels, although since the game is still as difficult as ever, that didn't really change much for me, but I'm sure it will push some of you out there to suffer through getting blown up by some very, very mean multicolored lines. So, as to be expected from a Super Light release, rather bare bones, but for the price of entry, you know, what more could you want? Luckily, 2 other games also released the same day as Qix 2000, following the exact same formula, and the next one is Super Light 1500 Space Chaser 2000, which includes Taito's 1979 arcade title Space Chaser and an arranged 2000 version update. Now, Space Chaser, not one of the more well-known Taito arcade titles nowadays, but interestingly this does look a little familiar, right? Almost like an early version of Pac-Man, and yeah, this game does indeed play a lot like Pac-Man, even predating it by almost a year, although as I'm sure we all know by now, being the first to do something means very little in the gaming world. It's all about who does it best, and Space Chaser here is most certainly not Pac-Man. Despite the game having the exact same goal, featuring less obstacles and a more simple maze, it's somehow way harder and also more complicated than Pac-Man. So you play as this little yellow ship being chased by the purple rocket. However, the rocket moves ever so slightly faster than the ship, and after a set amount of time, the rocket will begin to move even faster. Now, to counter this, you can hold down a button to make your ship speed up, but you only have a limited amount of fuel to do this. Now, on paper, that all doesn't seem too complicated, but I swear, it must have taken me about 10 attempts to beat the first level of this thing. You almost definitely need to plan ahead and get the dots in the center before using your fuel for one final dash towards the end. It's very tough and requires a bit more trial and error than Pac-Man, because at least in that you've got the power pellets and tunnels as a fallback, and also if you die, you can continue where you left off. Whereas if you die here, all the pellets return, and later levels also add new enemies, which make things a whole lot worse. Luckily, the 2000 update of this game makes the thing a whole lot more manageable and includes some of the expected updates to things like visuals, audio, as well as some new power-ups too. It's once again more of the same, but spruced up just enough to give fans a little something new to play. Look, I appreciate this game for what it is, but I don't think I'll be clamoring to play this one again anytime soon, since it really is like a much more stressful Pac-Man, and believe me, I find being chased by ghosts in a dark tunnel stressful enough as it is. Still though, an interesting curio, and they even gave this one a CGI opening. And look, everybody loves those. And here's the final of this trio of Super Light Taito games that came out on the very same day, and it's Crazy Balloon 2000, which of course features an arcade port of the 1980 original Crazy Balloon, and the updated arranged 2000 version of the same game. Now, with a name like Crazy Balloon, you'd think we were in for something pretty out there, and maybe for the time at least we certainly were. The aim of this game is to move a little box that's attached to a balloon through a maze of thorns, and yeah, that pretty much explains it all really. You know, despite the primitive graphics, this style of game is always a good bit of fun, I find. The real gimmick, I suppose, of Crazy Balloon is the way that the balloon shifts from left to right, meaning you kind of have to time your movements throughout the maze alongside the balloon swaying, and with each maze having shorter but also more risky routes, and the new levels each offering their own additional hazards like moving thorns or the maze itself moving, it's a fun time for what it is. Also, if you stay in one position for too long, a weird face comes out and blows you into the thorns, which is kind of unsettling. As for the arranged version, well, once again we got a visual and audio update, but at least from what I can tell, no new power-ups or gameplay features, meaning it's probably the one that mirrors the arcade original the most out of the arranged versions that we've looked at so far, although the visual update on this one kind of screams budget 2000 era PlayStation release in a sort of a kitschy, nostalgic way, and the balloons have faces on them now and seem to have an awful time when they die, and I thought that was pretty funny. So yeah, that was the trio of Super Light Taito classic releases that made it out exclusive to Japan. I'd say of the three, Qix is probably the best, but that's also just because Qix is the best of the three games we've looked at, so, you know, what you gonna do. Luckily, if you do want to get all three of these, there was a later Super Light 3-in-1 release in 2001, which contained all three games on one disc, so if you want to save some shelf space, that would be the one I'd go for. Now, this isn't the last we'll see of the Super Light series, or the Simple series, or Qix for that matter, but for now, let's leave the year 2000 behind us and move on to the exciting time that is 2001, so we can play even more classic Taito game ports, although this time, things are a little bit odd. That's right, it's Puzznik. Everybody loves Puzznik. Originally released in arcades in 1989 before being ported to pretty much everything. This game eventually found its way onto the PS1 in the year 2001 before seeing a Western release quite late in the console's life cycle in 2003, courtesy of the likes of Midas and Mudduck, names you can certainly trust. Now, Puzznik is a pretty straightforward tile matching game that's easy to learn and hard to master. You control a little cursor and use this cursor to move tiles around on the screen. If you match 2 or more of the same tile, they disappear, and the goal is to erase all the tiles on the screen. Now, this starts out deceptively easy before introducing some really brain-tingling puzzles. It's easy to see the appeal of this right away, and with Taito's charming characters and branching path system in play, this game was a pretty big hit back in the day, and an especially good fit for portable play, I found. Now, this PS1 version here is a little odd. It's part of a duo of games ported over to the console by a developer called Altron, who made some interesting games on the console like Robo Pit and Mighty Hits, which I really quite enjoy. These PS1 ports of Taito classics, however, not so much, and this isn't really down to the gameplay, which is more or less exactly what you'd expect, but the visual and audio updates, as well as the 30 FPS frame cap on this rather old game, not really the best. Now, I'm not too fussy about frame rates, as I'm sure you know, but on the whole, despite being a very playable version of Puzznik, it's not a good port or version of this game in my opinion. I mean, we all know this could and probably should run better, especially here in 2001. However, that doesn't really take away from Puzznik being a really fun game that puzzle fans should check out, and the same is also true for our next game, where unfortunately the port differences are a bit more glaring. That's right, it's a port of Cleopatra Fortune, known as Cleopatra's Fortune in the West, once again making out in 2001, and once again from Altron, and once again, not a very good port. Now, this one hurts a little bit more because for those that know Cleopatra Fortune, this is probably one of Taito's best ever puzzle games. Interestingly, this game first launched exclusively in late 95 on the Taito X55 karaoke machine, a device that could not only download songs, but video games as well, and Cleopatra Fortune was originally an exclusive to this system before seeing an arcade port later in 96. Now, sadly, this X55 original is currently considered lost media, but luckily the arcade original does exist, and that was later ported to the Saturn in 97, and it's a banger, let me tell you. With beautiful 2D visuals, addicting gameplay, and in my opinion, one of the all-time great puzzle game soundtracks. Seriously, the music in this thing is worth the price of admission alone. Every puzzle game benefits from some house bangers. As for the gameplay, well, this is kind of like a cool Egyptian take on Tetris, where the goal is to bury these gems beneath stone pillars and sarcophagi. Is that the plural for sarcophagus? Whatever it is. It does take a little while to get used to, but once you get the hang of it, it's an absolute blast. And when the music is also this good, it's legit hard to put down. Now, sadly, this Taito version was exclusive to the Saturn in Japan, but a few years later, the PlayStation and Dreamcast got this Altron version, and once again, while the gameplay is untouched and as good as ever, the visual updates, the audio updates, and the frame rate downgrade from 60 to 30 FPS are just not the vibe in my opinion. Everything is the same, but just a bit cheaper and lower budget. Like, compare the original version to the updated Altron version soundtrack. It's not bad exactly, it's just not as good. Like, taken on its own merit, especially in a world where playing the original version of this thing wasn't as simple back in the day, yeah, I would have snapped up a shoddy budget port of this thing, but nowadays when you can very easily play the Saturn arcade or even modern port of this game, which is based on the Saturn port, well, this version, like I said, is not the vibe. Still though, even with the issues that these Ultraman ports of both Puzznik and Cleopatra Fortune have, if you see them for cheap and want to add some good puzzle games to your collection, you can still certainly do a lot worse. Just also remember that you can certainly do a lot better. And you deserve better. I mean, you can trust me, a man on the internet, a place where nobody ever lies, ever. Come on, you didn't think we'd get through this video without a Mahjong game, did you? Of course not. It's tradition to have at least one Mahjong game and one sports game, and while Super Football Champ wasn't the best sports game I've ever played, I think Shanghai Soryu Siren might be the best Mahjong game I've ever played, mostly because instead of traditional Mahjong, it's based on Mahjong Solitaire, which is a lot easier for me to play, and also the game has banging music and, you know, that's always a plus. This game is a port of the arcade original of the same name, which ran on the GNet hardware and was seemingly developed by Activision, oddly enough, before being brought to the PlayStation courtesy of Taito. So Shanghai Solitaire is a popular take on Solitaire, just with Mahjong pieces instead of cards. The goal is to match two of the same pieces, but you can only use pieces that are on the edge of the playing field. At least I think that's the rules anyway. Luckily here in video game form, you can't really make illegal moves, so that does make things a bit easier. There's 3 different modes: the standard traditional Shanghai, which is also what I believe to be included in the arcade original, but there's also some console exclusive editions like this fun level-based mode called Intoyo. There's also some cool cutscenes and music in this part, and other than me seemingly always running out of moves to make and failing the levels, this seems like a really fun single-player mode for this style of game, with some really nice production values too. Although maybe the highlight of this package is the Pandemonium mode, which is a 1v1 battle mode where you play against the AI or a human opponent who are simultaneously trying to spot and beat each other to find matches. It also has great music, and we really do love to hear it. Honestly, yeah, between this being an easy enough game to learn the basics for and the decent production values, this is a bit of a sleeper Taito hit on the console, or a Activision hit, I guess. Either way, if you want to play a decent game of Shanghai Solitaire by yourself or against an opponent, Shanghai Soryu Siren is an easy recommendation. Well, we're down to our final 4 games in today's list, which is luckily where some of the coolest games reside, and this is one of them. It's Simple 1500 Series Volume 66, The Kaiten Mawasun Da, another port of a GNet arcade title originally released in '99 before making its way to the PlayStation as part of the Simple series. And unlike other Simple series releases we've looked at so far, like Space Invaders and that cool Ray double pack, this game only ever saw a release as part of the Simple series, and I'm glad it did because it is crazy. This game is essentially Taito's take on an arcade minigame collection. Think Konami's Bishi Bashi, Namco's Point Blank, or even Magical Date from earlier. But the gimmick in this one is that all the games are built around a rotating controller. In the arcade, the cabinets featured these big handles you could rotate around, and each game utilizes this in some way. How does this translate over to the PlayStation, you ask? Well, with the analog sticks, of course. Lots and lots of rotating the analog sticks. And while it's probably not as fun as it would be in the arcade, it's still pretty damn fun here, and also very weird. Now, being a budget release, you pretty much just get the arcade experience here, which can be played with 1 or 2 players, and you choose from a group of 5 sets of minigames with 4 games each, and these can range from making some takoyaki, crushing a big robot, delivering people to the correct floor via an elevator, making sure a drunk salaryman gets to his train on time, spinning this guy around so that all the blood rushes into his head, and then letting him loose into the sky where he belongs. You know, classic stuff. And speaking of classic stuff, there's even a whole set of minigames based on some Taito classics, games you've definitely seen in this video already, and even some you haven't. Look, it's Camel Tree. Everybody loves Camel Tree. Honestly, this game right here is right up my alley. As I've gotten older, I've come to understand that my taste in video games can basically be described as classics of game, and this right here, this is a classics of game ass game. Content-wise, it's certainly a bit lacking compared to the other console versions of arcade minigame collections that are out there, which is a shame, but the production values are on point, the games are silly, and even with the occasional awkwardness of spinning an analog stick around the whole bunch, it's hard not to see the appeal of this thing. Better still, this game would also see an expanded port over on the Nintendo DS, where it also got an international release under the name Turn It Around, and this DS version would also get a spiritual successor on the Wii called Furu Furu Park, which is also pretty crazy and worth checking out. This is one of those games I would have likely never come across if it wasn't for doing this video, and I'm very glad I did. And if you, like me, run on the incredibly efficient energy known as whimsy, then you too should check this thing out. Just don't let the blood rush into your head for too long. Seriously, G-Force is no joke, unless we're talking about that guinea pig movie. That shit is pretty stupid. Well, here it is, our final game of 2001, and it's more Qix. Well, at least in the West anyway, where this game was released as Qix Neo exclusively in North America in 2003. Back in Japan in 2001 though, this game released as the final Simple Series Taito game, and that's Simple 1500 Series Volume 80, the Jintori Volfeed. And for those who don't know, Volfeed is basically the Japanese-made follow-up to the original Qix, now with a whole new name and a whole new sci-fi aesthetic. The gameplay is pretty much the same as before, which is to say drawing lines and capturing space is the aim of the game, but now you've got a whole bunch of cool power-ups to help you out. And instead of a collection of abstract lines trying to murder you, Taito invented a whole range of new evil sci-fi stuff to do that instead. And my god, did they do a good job of it. Included in the package is what you'd expect. We've got a port of the 1989 arcade original, which is undoubtedly a much fancier and visually diverse version of Qix, and probably the version of the game I think most newcomers would enjoy nowadays. Although seriously, they did invent a whole new collection of ways for this game to fuck you over, so be prepared to take a ride on the struggle bus while you get used to it. And as per usual, this PlayStation version also includes a new arrange mode, which enhances the visuals and sound and also gives you a little intro to make things a whole lot more dramatic. Sadly, the upgrades in this mode aren't the most dramatic you'll ever see. I mean, the game does certainly look a bit different, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's better, just a bit different. Still though, a nice inclusion for fans of the original, and a nice budget package overall for fans of Qix, or Volfeed, depending on where you're from. Anyway, remember Psychic Force? Well, it's back in clamp form. That's right, bringing us into the final year of Taito on the PlayStation, we have TV Animation X Unmei no Tatake, which made its way to the PlayStation in 2002, and is in fact an anime TV tie-in that is also a hidden Psychic Force game, and that's pretty cool, especially if you like playing as hot anime boys, and come on, don't we all? So for those who don't know, X was a manga from the popular all-female manga collective Clamp, who are probably most famous for Cardcaptor Sakura, who too got lots of cool PlayStation games, including an incredibly difficult version of Tetris from the Grandmaster devs, and even though I'm terrible at it, I do like that it exists. Well, X here is a much more somber, apocalyptic affair, with heaven and earth duking it out in brooding fashion. It got a movie back in '96, and also a TV series in the early 2000s, which is what this game is based off of. And since it has lots of cool high-flying action, and Bandai thought, I wonder what company has an engine made for high-flying anime action? Well, Taito were here to deliver exactly what you'd hope, an X game built in the Psychic Force engine. And I gotta tell you, it's pretty great. It even gets an anime opening, which is to be expected seeing as it's based on an anime, but it is still nice to see the Psychic Force traditions living on. So, how's the game? Well, for the most part, it is a reskin of Psychic Force 2, at least in terms of gameplay, only now with less modes, characters, and stages. But it does have an entirely new set of characters and stages, and that also means some fancy new moves and specials, and also a rather nice graphics upgrade too, making this one of the cleanest looking fighters on the console in my opinion. The models especially look very nice, and even the menu and UI elements all look very clean in this game. The soundtrack also slaps too, but once again that is a Psychic Force tradition at this stage.
Ready, go!
やがった。これで終わりだ。バカな。分かったんだ、やっと。
So yeah, while overall not the best Psychic Force game on the console, if you were looking for more Psychic Force or a game based on the X series, this is really about as good as you could hope for, especially in the year 2002, when the quality and budget for PS1 anime tie-ins could be a bit hit or miss. Seriously, I've played a lot more Beyblade than I would like to admit. Funnily enough, this wouldn't even be the last secret Psychic Force game Taito would put out, as a few years later over on the PS2, Taito would release a game based on the manga series Rosen Maiden, which is about porcelain dolls flying around and fighting each other, which once again Taito thought, hell yeah, let's put that in the Psychic Force engine. Unfortunately though, for the fighting fans, this game is about 5% Psychic Force and 95% visual novel, and also the fighting that isn't here feels nowhere as tight as Psychic Force or X, so it's more of an interesting curio than a must-get for Psychic Force fans. But still though, at this rate, there could be even more secret Psychic Force games out there left to discover. You never know. But for now at least, I'm happy to have dug into the series and its weird anime spin-offs, and if you like your fighting games flashy and out there, you know what to do. Anyway, that brings us to our final game of the episode, and you know I like to save the very best for last, and by best, I mean incredibly anticlimactic, because once again, it's more Qix. Well, here it is, our final game of 2002, our final Super Light game, our final Qix game, and our final game of this episode. It's Battle Qix, which, you know, no shade to Qix, I really do quite like as a series, but it's no hot anime Angel Boy Psychic Force game where you drive a sword through other hot anime boys, but it does have a flame with shifty eyes and some anime teeth, so that's pretty cute, except for when it gets angry, and believe me, he gets pretty angry. So Battle Qix, as the name implies, is more Qix, but now with a battle element, and as we've learned throughout the video, adding a battle mode to your games is always a good thing, and when it comes to Qix, that statement is also true here. The game still contains a single player mode, now with entirely new visuals, and also a bunch of pictures to uncover of women, some of which are uncomfortably young, and no, that is not a dodgy Pink Floyd parody. The characters that appear in these images, you can also select in the game's battle mode, where you compete against an AI or human opponent with the goal of capturing more of the field before your opponent does. It's all pretty self-explanatory, assuming you've been paying attention to the previous Qix sections, and as somebody who has been writing for a very long time and is himself beginning to lose his grasp on reality, I don't blame you for zoning out. Overall, this certainly isn't the fanciest or most visually appealing of the Qix games, at least when it comes to the game itself, but the amount of content and the battle mode here does make it another worthwhile pickup for fans of the series, and it's always nice to see more competitive variations of classic games out there. I mean, with the amount in this video, you could even hold a whole Taito-centric tournament if you wanted. I don't know who would, but if you at least get the frog fighting minigame involved, I'm sure people will be down to clown. God, remember the frog fighting? Good times. Well, there you have it. That was a look at every game Taito brought to the original PlayStation, or at least I think it was anyway. As always, there's a chance I missed one or two. I mean, did you know I missed a Japanese release of the Sydney Olympics game in that Capcom video, rendering it completely unwatchable? I know, absolutely tragic. So Taito on the PlayStation, probably one of the most eclectic and downright experimental collection of games we've looked at yet. We had a nice mixture of their arcade heavy hitters, classic puzzle game repertoire, wide range of Japan only titles, simulation games, and also some of the most daring shoot 'em ups and fighting games that we'd see on the console. Honestly, it's a collection of games where the quality is so consistently high. It's a wonder Taito weren't bigger during this generation of games, but sadly, unlike the companies we've looked at so far, Taito didn't really have a breakout hit on the PlayStation that kind of changed the gaming landscape in the way Psygnosis, Namco Square, or Capcom did, at least in the West anyway. I mean, you could argue Densha de Go did in Japan, but what's big in Japan can often go unnoticed by the majority of gamers in the West. I mean, I love Sakura Wars, but I feel like I'd have a hard time explaining it to the boys back home playing Escape from Tarkov, you know? And that's the thing with Taito's PlayStation library. It is pound for pound one of the strongest and most consistent collection of games out there, but if you look at your average top 100 games on the PlayStation list, you'd be lucky to find even even 1 or 2 Taito games in there, and if you do, it's most likely going to be one of the Puzzle Bobbles or G-Darius or RayStorm. Does that mean Taito's games aren't worth playing? Of course not, you silly Billy. This is just the reality of the original PlayStation. Thinking of this console and its library in the scope of a top 100 or even top 1000 list is quite silly when there is this many cool and exciting games out there. And Taito have some of the coolest and most exciting. If you want to play some experimental, arcadey, highly polished and just downright fun video games, well then if you see this logo, you're in safe hands. Well, except for Jupiter Strike, but we can let that one fly. As for the future, well, Taito would continue to be heavily involved in the arcade industry even up until this day, their Groove Coaster series in particular being a pretty big hit. As for their output on the PS2 and beyond, once again they continue to deliver a whole host of weird and experimental games that still made buying a game with the Taito logo on the box a very safe and worthwhile experience. And of course there's the Taito Memories collections, which once again come highly recommended, especially that second entry, which will net you a good chunk of the games you've seen in today's video. However, after some financial trouble in 2005, Taito would be swallowed up by our old friends Square Enix, which they still remain a part of today. This means a lot of Taito's franchises remain dormant outside of the odd Puzzle Bobble, Bubble Bobble, Darius or Densha de Go game, but at the very least, as you've seen, there's been a lot of effort to bring many of Taito's classic games to modern hardware via the likes of M2 and Hamster's arcade archives, meaning their games still get a lot of love today. And also, if you like these little arcade machines that they brought out for a bit, the Taito Egret 2 Mini is by far my favorite of these types of releases, not only because the games included are absolute bangers, but look at this, the screen pops out and can transform from a horizontal to vertical aspect ratio. How cool is that? Now I can play Rayforce how it was always intended, on a very tiny screen on my desk. Also, if you want to learn a bit more about Taito's incredible arcade output over the years, this book from Hardcore Gaming 101 put me onto a lot of their cooler games back in the day and is a great resource for learning about titles that you might have missed. So shout out to the HD 101 crew for helping to spark my love of Taito, and in particular Dead Connection. That game is seriously a banger. So yeah, much love to Taito, not only for their excellent library of PlayStation games, but for their incredible gaming legacy, one that I hope continues to flourish and be celebrated for years to come. I mean, they did make Dino Rex after all, and you gotta give them that. Anyway, that's the end of yet another very long video, which means I gotta give a huge thank you to my very lovely Patreon supporters who continue to feed my crippling Wonderswan habit, including fine folks like Alan Castellan, Alias McDough, an L with Knees, Bleeding Card, Brendan Hess, Brian, Clumbums, Danny, Dave Nolan, David Rodriguez Madrian, Discun, the mascot for the Famicom Disk System, Doma, Etchy Gamer, Fragile Traveler, Gigazol, Ice Slide, Hero Forte, Jacob Althouse, Jared Bynum, Johnbo81, JR Hurd, Karurun, Kyle Winter, Corley 2K1, Life Sword, Mr. Papala, Mikal, Moomin Biscuit, Trans Rights Are Human Rights, Mr. the Joshman, My Pal Robot, Nathan McMullen, Nick Norman, Hikafoop, Richard Kramer, SN Kierstead, Cyeno, Sean Slater, Spectre117, The Friendly Chocoball Bird, Kiyoro-chan, Tolkoto, Will Savoy, and Zark, who have all subscribed at the Fan++ tier. And last but not least, I'd like to give a huge thank you to you at home or wherever you are for watching the video. I sure do hope you enjoyed it, and if you've made it this far, why not give the video a like if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm sure in the current hellscape that is the world of being a YouTuber, it won't make much of a difference, but it's like that crazy lady who keeps throwing boxes at me in the local Tesco says. Every little helps. And you never know, I might even make that Konami video someday if we can reach, let's say 200,000 subscribers. That seems like a fair amount, so yeah, let's get going. Anyway, I'll be back with some more PlayStation goodness in the hopefully not too distant future. But until then, take care of yourselves, be nice to one another, and I'll talk to you again real soon. See ya!